Welcome to the 10th installment of the PolyCast side series, Evergreen. I'm CanusAlbinus.
And I'm Daniel DanQ Quick. The series' 10th season consisted of 27 episodes and 2 specials, one of which compiled segments cut from recordings throughout the show's seasons to date.
As with the previous 9 Evergreens, DanQ, PolyCast regular co-host here, selected and ranked the 10 topics he feels most retain their relevance years after they were first published.
As well, recurring guest co-host CanusAlbinus here re-listened to the entire season to select the 10 most representative moments for the show, alongside an honorable mention.
Double digits, go. Number 10, from episode 260. A study of Civilization V multiplayer leads to a quantitative and qualitative questions, as well as answers.
The Civ Science Project from Captain Wozak. Wozak? Yeah. I'm combining what he said in the opening post here on CFC as well as on the About page of the Civ Science Project at civscience.wordpress.com. The Civ Science Project is the result of a big undertaking of mine to test some of the mechanics of Civilization V with statistics and real data. I like how statistics and real data are separated there. In a nutshell, I gathered data from 180 filthy robot games, including information on starting location, religion, social policies, warfare, and more. Like many 5-player, I stick to single-player. I simply don't have time outside of work to sit down for the long sessions needed for competitive multiplayer. As an aside, have you tried co-op? But this creates a small problem for my project. Playing against the AI does not help understand the core mechanics very well.
Oh dear.
The Civ 5 AI does not actually excel at decision-making, and higher difficulty levels are the result of each AI Civ receiving huge bonuses to achieve dominance. And yes, as an aside, affectionately referred to as derp bonuses on this show. Continuing, in addition, each AI has vastly different personalities, changing the way each game is played. On the other hand, multiplayer is more useful. Humans will make better decisions based on the situations the game presents, and will be largely consistent with those decisions over time. Also, as all players play the same game, with no bonuses like the AI, it offers us a much more fair comparison on how different scenarios play out. I am a serious Civ 5 geek. I've been playing heavily since the game released, and became even more invested since the release of the expansions Gods and Kings and Brave New World. In my real life, quote-unquote, and he actually uses quote-unquote, I'm also a scientist. I work with a lot of data, crunching numbers to try to find the relationship between things in a complex world. This is the project in which I combine my appetite for statistical analysis with one of my favorite hobbies, enjoy, and it's going to be a series of articles, appears to be based on the data from this game, where he presents the data, analyzes the data, and then attempts to come to conclusions based on that particular data. The article on the social policies is looking at the number of social policies that are adopted per civilization, the potential number of, and then extrapolating the potential number of policies that each civ could adopt, the number of social policies per era based on which policy tree actually adopt, and then finally looking at those who won, how many social policies per era they had, and then how many games where people lost social policies per era, and trying to find a correlation between the two. This person says that there are some indicators, it's more of a tendency, but there is no necessarily direct correlation between any of these things, because he acknowledges I'm only looking at particular pieces of the puzzle, and he avoids trying to have the puzzle look like what it is that he wants it to look like, which is good.
Also, flag on the play, when doing statistics, please never take exactly one person's stuff and then assume that it's everybody. Because this is 180 games of Filthy Robot.
Yes.
And Filthy Robot being a person. And this is only stuff that's managed to get onto the internet because he checked the Filthy Robot YouTube channel. So there's a bit of a problem there. That person's way of playing, doesn't matter if he's playing different civs and going for different victory conditions, they still have style. A certain style where they may go for culture more often than not, or ignore it unless going for culture. Also, he kept rationalism out of the tree relation, which is kind of funny, unless you say, well, he always does this. Well, okay, but how many policies did he put into rationalism at certain points, or versus the other stuff? Like, in a low culture game, did he do tradition, rationalism, and then just pure ideology? Which is weirdly left off of here, even though you have a final choice later in the game, ideology versus social policies, as a choice. So how many ideologies did he get filled out? Which kind of is a bit of an issue. Also, he only looked at the end because somebody actually stopped and asked on his page when things were gotten, because that's actually kind of a huge factor for some stuff, because he keeps bringing up Poland because of the 7 free. And yes, they're always going to be 7 free. But the thing about Poland that is sort of missed in here is that with Poland, you don't have to exactly finish tradition, then hit Renaissance to get the first rationalism policy. The moment you hit Renaissance, you get the first rationalism policy, period. Because you get one free as soon as you hit that. Also, Poland gets forced into filling out a couple extras in alternate trees necessarily if you played Poland the exact same way you would play any other civ. So if your exact plan is to finish tradition, if you just do tradition flat out, and then your very next actual social policy is rationalism when you hit the Renaissance, then Poland's already taken 2 extra social policies in alternate tree. And obviously it depends on what they're doing, but the moment you hit Renaissance, you're going to be too deep into rationalism, because if you played the exact same way, you're actually going to be one more deeper into rationalism than anybody else at that exact point, and then also finish it faster. So there are more factors he's not controlling for with this data. So basically, big grain of salt with this data. Also, Egypt gets really pushed up because of wonders in the stats. But since this is a multiplayer game, is this like a multiplayer game where Filthy Robot is playing as Egypt against really poor people or really poor players and therefore getting a lot of early wonders that he shouldn't be getting as Egypt?
Yeah, because I was looking at his Egypt and I was actually surprised about Egypt being at the top. I was like, what?
And or is he finding a lot of situations where he's just not on the front line with some of these stronger players in terms of, well, I'm all the way over here, so I don't have to worry about you over there right now. I've got time in the early game to take advantage, particularly of Egypt's unique ability and have the increased production for wonders.
Yeah. That also means like Germany and the Inca. I mean, if you look at the tail end of it, Germany and the Inca are really low, except yes, they get no culture-related bonuses, but you could easily still get a religion with them and get culture, which he sort of takes a factor in that, because he mentions various places where, like, this religious type civ got more social policies, or like Spain showed up next to a high faith natural wonder, and therefore there's good discussion mid-area in the article about honor and piety are there, but never chosen because they don't provide good enough bonuses.
It's tough in a free-for-all multiplayer, though. See, there's also that convoluting factor. The majority of his games are played under certain settings and rules environments that may not translate to other situations. For example, Liberty is a lot stronger on average if you're fighting someone one-on-one than it would be in a free-for-all with 5 people and more limited space.
Well, he did say somewhere in there, going Liberty plus Piety is actually better. Like, when Filthy Robot did do those things, he actually got more social policies with that mix.
Is that just because he happened to die less? Or, you know, that's also tough to gauge.
Well, he did try and control finish times, either early or late or stuff. He tried to control for that, which is why he went per era. But that's kind of the problem with not tracking it as the game went, because when policies show up is actually far more important. So he sort of averages the era. If you get social policies at the end of an era versus at the beginning, that's actually potentially bigger problem for
I'm just thinking, if you're losing, you're probably on average getting less social policies per era in the general sense, even if you're not wiped out right away. It's a bit of a combo feedback thing going on there.
Yeah. He does try and control for it with variants in there. And I love how Babylon's variance almost puts it up at the Poland level, except that its variance also puts it down to Inca. Like, it's got such a massive variance on it that it depends. And not all these civs got played more than a couple times.
Yeah.
That's a bit of the problem. Only some of the civs got a lot of games, or at least 5 games or more at the most.
Yeah, and at one point he acknowledges, in the case of Venice, there's the paragraph about another fun observation that Venice does well, which also makes sense, but had in brackets in the first sentence, although there is only one Venice game in our data set.
Yeah, that's not a good data set.
Acknowledge that you've looked at 180 games, and you put this on the chart where all else is being equal, and it was in 1 out of the 180 games.
Yeah, that's pretty thin.
Why would you pick Venice generally?
Well, it depends.
Well, it might have just been, in his games he randomed it.
Yeah, it could be.
Well, I guess I gotta roll with this.
Yeah, given the wide variety of civs that have been played, I'm assuming he randoms. Because there's many civs in here that in a competitive multiplayer game you wouldn't purposely choose.
That's true.
Unless you really want to give yourself a challenge. It's like, okay, I'm this good, so therefore.
That's straight cherry tapping, yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
Also, you have to keep in mind that this is just Filthy Robot. Good player, but...
Yeah, doing this with any one player is problematic, regardless of if it's Filthy Robot or your mom.
You could collect a lot from the opponents in a game, too, potentially, if you want to just parse data, but...
I think the article would be better titled slightly, How to Maximize the Number of Social Policies, ? Or even an approach to understand. As opposed to how to maximize the number of social policies, you get the impression, I'm going to be looking at something that, on balance, more often than not, is going to be telling me how to maximize the number of social policies in a given game, regardless of, circumstance X, Y, and Z. I think this would have been more interesting if it was, I analyzed 180 multiplayer games from, say, Giant Multiplayer Robot, the Civ 5 multiplayer system that we talked about on episode 152 in season 6. That would be more meaningful data. Although then you could then compare it to, say, an individual person within that data set and then try to get, really down to the nitty gritty. And if it ends up being that data is comparable, then that would be more incidental than proving, checking out this one person was just as valid. No, the approach is good in terms of what he's doing with the data, but the data that he's gathered from the beginning, he's already behind the 8 ball, and I will acknowledge at least he's up front with that.
Yeah.
He's not trying to hide anything. I'll give him that. If he was trying to hide stuff, or he was trying to rationalize, I could take this into account, but blah, 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 wouldn't have chosen this topic. There's some validity here, but there's some work to be done.
I mean, when it comes down to what the actual conclusions are later, the only things he really pushes to say is that strong religions, if you found them, with high faith output, are likely to provide a culture boost. That's pretty hedged. But it's also something we already knew. If you found a strong religion, i.e. one that gives you stuff in a big way, and you even push it towards the culture and faith side, you're likely to produce a strong culture boost. Okay. Yes, we actually knew that. But he caveats that with likely through the purchasing of multiple culture-producing buildings. So it's not a strong religion with a high faith output at that point. It's actually if you build your religion in a certain way. That's very different than going, I took the strong religion that gives me a lot of money, gives me a lot of faith, gives me a lot of other stuff, but didn't have exactly that extra culture. So I don't know. It's interesting, but it's definitely a big grain of salt to try and translate it to anything else.
With only a certain number of games, and most of the civs being 5 games or less, it really seems like it would have been better to group them all together and say, okay, we had 281 games. Was that the number? Whatever it was. 180. Okay. And then start breaking it down by different things. What did they focus on to start? Are these tradition starts? Are these liberty starts? Did they go religious? All these different things. It seems like those stats would have been more appropriate than which civ, because there's just not enough data on a which civ basis.
Yeah, I don't mind that he tried to break it out to which civ, because there is those little differences. Like, civs that get direct, straight-up culture bonuses, that's going to be completely different than somebody who gets none.
Well, then, what if you group and you say, hey, look, these civs have culture bonuses, these civs don't, and do some groupings like that? That would make a lot more sense when you only have a couple of games to work off of. I mean, I don't mind that you want to break it down by civs, but you just don't have enough data to break it down by civs.
There's a lot more likelihood that he did a tradition opener or a liberty opener, or he picked X, quote-unquote filler policy a larger number of times so you could see how that performs. So that stuff's a little bit more useful in that regard. Although you still ultimately want to see what kind of predictive value these choices have on your win, not necessarily on your number of social policies. If you win the game but have 6 less social policies on average, nobody cares. You won the game. So that is something else to keep in mind as well.
Well, that's the fallover point of how many social policies did you actually need to win the game.
Yeah.
And if you put too much culture into your game and you got way over that line, well,
maybe you should have built more units.
And that would be really good, going back to one of your original points of knowing per era how much did they do, because then you can say, okay, well, in your victories, you were getting 3.5 for whatever classic era, the ancient era, all those, whereas in your losses, you're getting 1.5. Now, are social policies important for victory? Maybe.
Or is just not dying to a chariot rush important for victory? That's what that might be telling you.
Yeah.
Even if you could break it down per era, did you spend the classical era massing up social policies to get to tradition finisher just in time for medieval?
Mm-hmm.
What was your culture output at that point? Or did you completely ignore the culture buildings until late medieval and then tried to catch up? But then again, that cuts itself off of were you left alone in a corner to basically do what you wanted versus mass chariot archer rushes.
Particularly fun with Huns in Egypt in the game.
Yeah, just looking at total numbers and not when it actually occurred in the game, because if you're able to unlock something, whatever that is, adopt that policy more quickly than something else, it just contributes to the snowball effect that we often like to talk about. It's like saying, hey, in the last game I found in my Pantheon, I had mine on turn 10. When did you get yours? 90. But the data would record that as you both got a Pantheon. Define Mars, there are just too many variables to draw any real conclusions from the sample size. Even if it was from like 180 games from multiple people, right? So then each one of those 180 games...
That would still be kind of a small sample.
Yeah.
Even if the minimum, multiplayer game, let's say there were 2 people, that would be 360. But then the question is also, was it the same 2 people? What about map size? Map type, blah, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. You're going to get a snapshot of something. Based on this, let's try to extrapolate this. But I think if you're going to try to extrapolate some generalizations, as we've been getting at here, there's some approaches that have been taken that make it difficult, as good sounding as it is, or maybe even as consistent as it might be with your own experience. You just kind of have to take a step back and say, to quote Matt Jin, not that I often like to do that, but you're taking this with a grain of salt.
Made you quote me.
It's interesting. How much can you conclude beyond... well, it applies to this person's games and their 180 games that they played?
Well, I guess Filthy Robot himself could take this information and adjust their game style, because that's really who is the only real beneficiary of this. Games won, you had 2.5 social policies per era. Games lost, 2.28. What does that mean? Just based on that, Filthy Robot should get a couple more social policies per era, and you might win more.
I don't think you can make that conclusion. I don't think you can even conclude that.
I know. I just figured I'd throw that in there.
Now imagine, phrase that very carefully. Might win.
Yeah, might.
Yeah.
And we might get struck by an asteroid today. We might. It's possible.
It's true.
Wow, way to cheer things up, Dan. Jeez.
Yeah.
It's very important when you're analyzing data like this to not make conclusions that the data doesn't support. If I see that somebody's getting less social policies per era, in my mind, there's a strong possibility that somebody's attacking him to cause him to lose the game. And that's probably putting influence on his building choices, unit choices, and whatnot. And if you're trying to get more culture buildings while you're being sieged, you're probably not playing that well.
Yeah. But there's also the thought of, hey, look, I went supermassive culture in the early game. I've got all the social policies. Yeah. Why are you killing me? I've got no units. I can't defend myself.
Respect my culture.
You got served.
I am respecting your culture. I respect it so much. I want it to be my culture.
Exactly. Yeah. Thanks for building all those wonders for me.
I'm gonna annex your culture now.
Number 9, from episode 251. Tactics one would not take in the game as a point of honor.
Strategies I will never do in Civ 5, and by I mean the opening poster or other posters in the thread. This one is started by Danaphinus. That's my best guess at pronouncing it. I apologize if it's wrong, but that's my best guess. Does anybody else have an aversion to certain strategies to the point that they never do them as a point of honor, is his question. He goes on to say a few things he won't do, like trade away a city he knows he's about to lose in a war, build a terrible city to trade to the AI, and then he will then burn it for no benefits, trade away Luxus for lump gold or other immediate things and pillage the resource, or nuke people about to win a science victory or destroy spaceship parts in transit. Oh man. I'm thinking of the quote-unquote honor brigade of Dark Souls here.
Nuke people that are close to a spaceship victory sounds like a good tactic to me.
Yeah. There's part of the reason that they make these parts have to go in transit is so that they are risked in transit, and destroying them in transit is therefore part of the game's design explicitly. However, you can make a case that some of these others aren't. My feeling on this matter, although I mostly ignore it in the thread and just talk about other stuff, any line you draw here is necessarily arbitrary unless you are literally finding a way to violate the game rules, like using cheat engines and crap. I think that's pretty far outside the bounds of gameplay. But then you have this other stuff where you might choose to use it or not based on your own desired level of challenge or something, or you might agree to avoid them as a part of a custom rule set because you think the game plays better. But in general, if you're not doing that kind of stuff, your cutoffs are arbitrary. I'm just going to say.
Wasn't number 3 fixed a while ago?
You can still build a fort on the resource and pillage it.
Yeah, but it's not. Well, you can build a fort on it.
Well, it's not pillaging it, but essentially you can break a lump sum deal by building a fort on the thing you're trading away.
Yeah.
So it was
different.
somewhat patched out.
But not
and
entirely.
I understand the line of thinking, okay, obviously the developers didn't intend for this because they actively attempted to remove it. Okay, fine.
And I think that's also been impacted a fair bit about not happening because in order to be able to do that lump sum gold, you do need to be friends with that person in order to get that, as opposed to just gold per turn.
Yeah, if Shock is ticked off at you, he's not going to go for that.
Even by default, AI won't go for that. You need a declaration of friendship. So you have to do some legwork to be able to use it at this stage. That was a good change for the game.
Yeah, build a terrible city to trade away to the AI who then burns and gets no benefit. That's more just badly coded AI. It shouldn't have wanted to buy it in the first place if it's...
Yeah.
Although, notably, you are taking a penalty in doing that. If you do not... Because your tech is going to cost more. Unless you are going to eventually build another city somewhere else that will leave you at the same number as previously. The fact that you went up to another city is going to make your tax cost more. And I believe your social policies as well.
Yes, and your social policies as well. And I know this person says, oh, well, you get lots of goodies for the cost of 2 turns building a settler. Well, maybe I could have gotten more goodies by building another unit or actually taking that settler and, I don't know, settling it somewhere that would be useful.
Well, it depends on what you can get, you know. AIs do favor cost of cities a lot more than some other stuff. So maybe you could toss a crappy city that they'll buy anyways for something that'll make them happier with you or stuff that you absolutely need.
Keep in mind, though, the scope of this thread is things that you won't do as a point of honor. If you're not doing it because it's bad gameplay, then, well, don't do it. But that's not a point of honor.
So second poster in the thread has number 5 here. Bribe Civ A with all your luxuries and gold per turn to declare war on Civ B, then declare war on Civ A, which you were going to do anyway on the same turn to put them in a 2-front war.
Yeah.
I don't know, that sounds like good strategy in some situations. I mean, I know it's a point of honor thing, but...
It goes back to the crummy AI. So are you going to limit yourself for extra challenge, or are you going to do it, basically? From an honor standpoint, I think that's a junk line of thinking because the AI sucks. The AI sucks at war, so you could make the exact same case about fighting the AI at war as you could about this. And AI sucks at teching, so if you're beating it at space race, well, then you're taking advantage of a poor AI. I mean, come on. You have to draw the line somewhere, but it's arbitrary. If you want to improve the AI, by all means, improve the AI. Or if you want to limit yourself on certain things for a challenge, go ahead. But as a point of honor, no, it's not credible.
Yeah, well, I just think that should not be allowed to happen. But then again, the AI shouldn't really...
A player shouldn't do it. If somebody bribes you to declare on somebody else in multiplayer, and then they declare on you, you done goofed.
Yeah. Obviously.
So I don't think this is a game problem beyond the AI's ability to handle it. This is pretty much an AI failing.
Rather than honor, I would limit myself more on what I feel is fun. Tactics end up being, I can get away with doing something that takes me 5 minutes to set up, and well, in those 5 minutes, I could have gotten a lot more fun out of the game than I could have out of spending time trying to ruin an AI that I was already going to beat anyway.
We're talking about tactics here. They're very specific, very situational, and it's also a question, again, of are you going to be at an advantage of doing this over something else, because it's always opportunity cost. Then there's also the fun factor as well, and I mean, you can do it, and if you see that somebody is doing it, are you going to cry foul on them? Like, you should not have done that because of a matter of honor, or you're exploiting something that you are aware of in terms of a failing of the AI in order to understand the mechanics? Or is it just, hey, you shouldn't have done that, you're being an ass?
Depends.
It really does depend, and the multiplayer aspect was kind of touched upon there as well. I think a lot of this stuff you can get into more meta, and when I say meta, I mean that in the context of I don't need to work within the mechanics of the game to recognize that what you did was a jerk. In other words, my response to you doesn't necessarily have to be because of what I saw you do in the game in terms of what the mechanics allowed. But I saw what you did. You connected this point and that point, and you did that. And I think that comes up in 5 as well, because if you go ahead and do that to an AI, the AI is going to be mad at you, but are they really going to be any more mad at you than if you had just declared on them otherwise?
Although, again, it's popped up, Vobo in the chat and even stuff that we were talking about for the bribing one civ to dow another civ and then dow them. I mean, just slapping on a global antitrust unfulfilled deals or whatever for the rest of the AIs in the game would just automatically prevent you from doing that more than once in a game.
Then the game would recognize through the mechanics, so of course getting the AI here, that, hey, no, I am more angry at you for declaring on me, not just because you declared on me, but because you're being a dick.
Yeah, you did this deal with me to declare war on somebody else, and then you declared war on me to get all that stuff back. So basically you got something for free. So all the other AIs in the game should look at it and go, don't make trade deals with that guy. Why? Because the human player will break it. Almost instantly even. So therefore, no trust in trade deals.
And you could be in a situation where you can say, well, I don't care. I got what I wanted out of that particular deal.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's fine.
Yep.
Yeah.
I do this knowing that the AI is not going to penalize me more than anything else. Not saying don't do it, because I still probably would do it. But then if someone calls you out on it, don't be like, oh, but why are you so mad at me? Like, fine, that's not something you're going to do, but it is something that I'm going to do. And if you really don't like the person who does that in a particular game, then either don't pay attention to them, don't play multiplayer with them, just try to do that to them first. You know,
you're making a decision that has consequences. It's not just you're blocked from doing it. You're getting a nice decision where, yes, I can do this. If anything else comes up, then I'm going to pay the price for it.
Or you can make the AI be meta and just have a little meta thing going on in the background between games where it's like, how many times did that human break the trade deals? Yeah, you know what? Next game, screw him. Till they burn off the human hate. That would just be amusing every once in a while.
Yeah, the AI knows your weaknesses.
On turn 73 in our game on March...
And it should have a message in there, too. By the way, this is why.
Number 8, from episode 267, responding to an email carrying conflicting feelings for Civilization 6.
An email? Yes, people still do send these things. I know it's hard
What?
to believe it. I know. Email.
Spam?
I know. Email is not dead, like records, because no one listens to records anymore. And print, I mean, there's no more things that are printed on paper anymore, because that's totally passé now, right? Yep. And I'm going to copy this for our guests into our Skype chat. It is very long.
Oh, God.
Whee! It is.
Oh.
It is. We're going to take it a paragraph at a time. I'm not going to read the whole thing and then go back.
Holy crap, it keeps going.
Hi, PolyCast team. I've been watching some of the Civ 6 preview videos and reflecting on the series lately. I am really getting the feeling that it's turning into a different kind of game now. Maybe it is fair to say that it's been simplified or even dumbed down. It feels to me like it's hollow and lacking in terms of economic and empire management side of things, which surely has to be the core of the game, ! And I read that first paragraph, and I think, that's not my take from the marketing of it at all. Simplified and dumbed down, man, oh man, that has some really heavy connotations on this show. I think it's different, and I think sometimes if different might be seen as simple when you're comparing it to, say, Civilization 5 or Civilization 4, and then you think, therefore, the gameplay itself is going to be simplified or dumbed down, but I just keep thinking about all the things that we haven't seen from the previews. I want to get my hands on the game so I can actually feel and experience just how immersive this game appears to be.
All I see reading it is somebody coming back from Civ 4 plus expansions and, saying, I don't like this, and I'm looking at it, Civ 6 and saying, well, it looks like we got a lot more mechanics that are going to add depth to the Civ 5 system, so I don't know, if you had the context of Civ 5, I don't know where you'd be coming from with this.
A lot of people said when Civ 5 came out that it was a dumbed down Civ 4, so
I was going to say, this argument sounds very familiar.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
I'm thinking some people's take on the graphic style, because some people have called it cartoony and stuff, and I think that may be affecting people's opinion of whether it is before they've even actually got to play the game.
I don't know, the next paragraph kind of says more about it than the first paragraph. So the whole districts just seem a bit weird to him. Do you like what they've done with civics, governments, and city-state interaction? So that's nice. But the look of the map and the way you interact with tiles seems, well, a bit baby-ish. Yeah, no. That's applying an aesthetic thing to say, oh, look, the aesthetics of the game. That must determine how thin or simplified or dumbed down the rest of the game must be. And yet, the more and more we see of it, the deeper and deeper the mechanics are.
I can see how he could fall into the trap of that thinking, because you see a lot of that being said by other people. And then it kind of sticks in your mind, especially if that's one of the first things you read and you keep reading, oh, there must be something to it. But we're judging a book by its cover here.
Yeah, well, the first couple screenshots didn't help with that.
No, they really didn't.
Yeah. But I'm not sure how you can say that districts are part of the simplification of it, since forcing people to actually build stuff on the map and think about where they place stuff and
what you want each individual city to specialize in,
or putting certain things at risk by putting it outside of the city, yada yada yada. That's not simplifying.
Yeah, we're used to your academy can be easily raised down, but the campus district is a whole hit to science. Or if somebody comes along and raises down your encampments or your holy sites, which is all of your religion for that city, it's that's not less complicated.
Or the fact that you need an encampment to build units that require strategic resources if you've only got the one. No, hey, look, I've got 6 iron from this one tile. Okay, I'm going to buy a bunch of legions or whatever in the city far, far away. In the city that I just planted far away. No.
Like in real life, you have to ship those things out.
Yeah, it makes it a little bit harder.
And also needing an encampment if you want your city to have any kind of bombard capability as well. I mean, I know there's a lot of abstraction in Civ, but for things like that, or especially, hey, this city's got 15 wonders in it. Are they building wonders on top of each other? That's a pretty cool tech. We should get that.
Yeah. So I think for that respect, on the district side, I would argue that it has not simplified the game or dumbed it down. I would argue that the districts part, and I really hate to say this, unpacking your cities. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. You hate to love and love to hate saying that, yes.
Yeah. Actually requires more effort and thought in terms of empire management. Now, the question of empire management side of thing, I don't know, because, if you take Civ 4 as the empire manager version of Civ, Civ 5 definitely didn't have it at all, comparatively, or very little of it. So I can see that as a weird thing, but I think there's a bit more empire management now in Civ 6 compared to Civ 5. It's back on an upward track rather than downward.
And I think his third paragraph kind of echoes what we've said in part in response to the first and the second paragraph, which is now I know that none of us actually have our hands on the game yet, and yes, it's likely to have patches and DLC as time goes on. But honestly, the way I'm thinking at the minute is that, based on my impressions from a number of Let's Plays, I might not even bother with the game, at least initially. That my first impressions on the basic design of the game are sufficient to decide that the game is not for me, and that unless it is radically reworked, probably no amount of patches and DLC would change my mind. And if there are enough Civ fans feel the same way, then Firaxis might succeed in alienating some of their core customers. That's true. And I guess it's kind of at the time, the marketing is kind of decide, are we better off keeping some of these core customers? Or are we better off, am I better off, for some, thinking financially, getting new customers?
Yeah, there's the whole hated argument of, we have to make this game appeal to a broader audience, therefore we can sell more, which is in the company's interest, but not really in the game's interest, per se. Oh, and to bring back the previous point, the lack of workers, and therefore the need of builders, is also not simplifying the game, because the simple version was auto workers, and that doesn't exist anymore. It's the question of make it more mass market. Therefore, for the core gamer, it basically turns into make it more for people who wouldn't even know what a strategy game is if you beat them with it, and therefore makes the game plummet in sales for people who actually want to play a strategy game because the game stops being a strategy game. So I fully understand that argument, but I don't think Civ 6 has headed that direction quite yet.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think Civilization as a series will ever stop being a strategy game. I mean, yeah, you can change the mechanics, shift them around, make different focuses, even change the animation scheme, change the artwork, but I think at the core, it will always remain the same game. And the elements which will make people good at it will always be the same. You'll always have to focus on having a good food income, your good production, your good economy, and everything about it. And all then will have to be funneled into having an army to either defend yourself or conquer everything. And this has been kind of like the recipe for success since the early days. Not even the heated argument, 1 unit per tile or a stack of doom or anything else. It didn't really change the game that much as people might make it out. It remained your run-of-the-mill turn-based strategy game. Everything you needed to know if you wanted to be good at Civ 4 basically translated in Civ 5, and I'm sure it will be translated in Civ 6.
Yeah, whether it's Civilization 6, 5, 4, all the way back, it's like, I need an army of some description, but what does that army look like? How do I accomplish it? When do I do that? Those are the things that change. So the particulars of the recipe change. But at the same time, it looks like they're also introducing something, considerations that we didn't have before in Civ 6, which, as Matt mentioned, and it's something that Firaxis and 2K mention all the time anyway, is the unstacking cities. Oh, that's new. I can't look at how am I going to change from what I did with unstacked cities in Civilization 5 or previous Civs, because that wasn't there. So in addition to modifying what I understand to be, this is how I go about doing this in the game, there's this new element that is substantially different enough that whether you're new to Civ or whether you're just new to Civ 6, there's going to be some thinking involved. So to me, the simplification and dumbed down would be, I have to think less, or I don't have to anticipate as much in the future. I can just play the turn. I don't have to do any kind of planning. I can just react.
So instead of having to think, okay, well, I've got to do this and this, but if I want to play at the middle level or the lower level, then say I don't have to think about the economy so much. I just have to do a couple things. But if you want to play at a higher level, especially with Civ 4 and other ones, then you had to think deeper mechanical stuff. You could leverage parts of the mechanics to do better than if you didn't pay any attention to those at all. That sort of thing still needs to exist. Otherwise, yeah, it does get simpler. Like, if you don't actually have to think about how mechanics work together to produce something bigger and better, then yes, that's a bit of an issue for the whole depth of mechanics. But as for the core question, yeah, obviously, Zarish brought it up in the chat. If they don't change the game, why are they charging for a new version? Yeah. Things are going to change. And there's always different ideas about how to implement things that make it more fun or interesting or even more strategically challenging, one hopes. Question of they get rid of things that had you think versus not. No, I don't think that's quite in there.
The next paragraph from Nick Parrish, who wrote us this email. I also found myself thinking for the first time that it's a bit weird for a game with such an epic scope that you have to push individual units around the map and worry about tactics is a bit mismatched, which I know is a criticism leveled at Civ 5. Maybe a more abstracted, bigger picture way of conducting war would be more appropriate, ? And I feel like that in and of itself is a whole separate conversation, and I kind of feel like I want Nick to follow up on that so we can respond to that more specifically. But when I heard of a more abstracted, bigger picture way of conducting war, I immediately thought of Risk. That's not Civ, but seeing as how that might not be what Nick is talking about, I think we need more clarification on that.
Yeah, well, it's certain games in the strategy genre decide to let you utilize the units at hand. Other games in the strategy genre basically let you build the fleet, army, whatever, and then don't let you have anything to do with the outcome. There's many games where that's been appropriately used and works out sufficiently. So it's a question of how close to the ability to affect the outcome of wars and battles and stuff like that do you get. And I'm thinking of stuff like Stardock's Galactic Civilization 3. You have literally no control over what's going to happen. Totally abstracted. You kind of toss your fleet out there and it runs into something and you get to see a pretty little movie of what happened. Even though you can go in and go, well, that's stupid. Player would never have done that. The way the game configured the ships or the way you provide me with enough options for specializing ships to do certain tasks, and then you don't actually have those tasks available as options within the fight, and you can't control how they interact in the fight, or blah, 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 and then you get random weird stuff kicking up, as an example. Or you have something like Endless Space, where you build the fleet and then you throw down cards and to give options at different phases of the fight. So it's still abstract because you don't necessarily directly control what's going on, but you can, put your finger on it every once in a while and push it in one direction or another. And then you have games like Civ that says, if you want a war, do it yourself.
Yeah, long story short, Civ 5 moved in more of a Battletech / Warhammer tabletop gaming direction with how we handle combat. And not everybody likes that. And going back to the point about core audience, I think the transition from Civ 4 to Civ 5 was the big transition. I don't think we're really going to have that problem with Civ 6.
Yeah. Civ 4, you still had control over what was going on. You had stacks of units and you still had to move them around the map and you still had to do stuff with them. The only difference really between the one and the other is that you didn't have the one unit per hex. Sarish brings up Endless Legend in the chat, though I would say Endless Legend is actually further off the map than Civ is. I think Civ's more in the middle, and because with Endless Legend it pops open a whole map, and then you have to do the fight for that section of where it is, and that can take much longer time than the Civ style. Though his point was more that you don't necessarily have full control because you can give units orders and then it'll attempt to do those orders during that turn, but things change and you can't specifically individually control each unit on its specific part of the phase. But yeah, it's kind of like strategy games have a lot of options on how to handle that sort of thing. People have different preferences, so All
right, continuing on here from Nick. For the record, I was a no Civ 5 naysayer. I probably put as much, if not more, time into Civ 5 than Civ 4. I found them to be two different, but quite enjoyable games. But with Civ 6, I'm finding myself with similar criticisms that some people had about Civ 5 and the direction the series seemed to take when it was released. I hope it sells well for Firaxis. It seems likely to me that they focused on making the game accessible and attractive to new players. Well, to me, making a game accessible and attractive to new players and making it accessible and attractive to existing Civ players need not be mutually exclusive. Although certainly at some point you're probably going to find someone who doesn't like the change from one Civ to another, or you're going to find someone who said, you know what, I didn't play a previous Civ title, I look at this new Civ title, and I still don't want to play it.
Yeah, it happens.
This really sounds like the transition from 4 to 5. I can totally see a plethora of mails like this when Civ 7 comes along and it's like, oh, I think they're changing the game too much. And I mean, back when Civ 5 transitioned to Civ 6, it was okay, but we got used to it. I think the transition won't really be that difficult. And like I said, the core will remain the same. You won't have to learn anything from scratch if you're already very familiar with the series.
You kind of have to throw the next paragraph in as part of this. Maybe there's room in the market for games like Civ 5 and 6 and a game called something like Civ Legacy aimed at diehard veterans, which updates and refines the Civ 4 experience. So, I mean, when you take that with the previous paragraph that Dan put in there, yeah, it's basically your point, but I just had to throw that second paragraph in, is the transition from 4 to 5 wasn't well taken by some people who didn't like change, or the particular changes that really irked them. And then since it's continuing on in 6, those same people are still not going to be too happy, and they'd like to go back in time to the Civ 4 style and have an updated version of squares and stacks.
With every new entry in a series, no matter what kind of game it is, or TV, or movies, or stuff, there's always some people who are going to be, they changed it, it sucks.
Yep.
And I almost feel like Nick is having an argument with himself.
Yeah. He's like, I'm not sure if I don't like this, I'm not sure if I do like this.
Which I think is healthy to a certain degree, because we all do that in our real life.
Yeah.
Or I like to think that we do. We need to do that, because we're trying to make an informed choice, and of course the best choice for us might not be the best choice for Tom, Dick, and Harry, Sally, Jane, and Sue. I don't know where I necessarily got all these names from. But anyway, it sounds like a weird band.
Yep.
Yeah.
Stuff happens. I'm sure we're going to look at Civ 6 and say, okay, especially once we get our hands on it and people start playing properly, not this weird stuff that's going on right now, that there's going to be parts of it you're like, you know what, they changed this, but it wasn't for the better. Or they need more work on it to make it better.
But to be fair, that's where we were with Vanilla Civ 5.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah.
Now that it's had a couple of DLCs and some little extra bits done, tweaked to it, now we love it. A couple of DLCs and some tweaks to it, we're probably going to love Civ 6 as well.
Nick has said, feel free to pick up bits of this email if you decide to use it on air. Bit of an essay, I know. But, see, the thing is, as much as you were arguing with yourself, we were able to follow. Like, it was very conversational, it was thoughtful, and with the criticism, you were being constructive. You know, if this was Civ 6 is going to suck, explicative, we wouldn't have even mentioned it on the show. You know, it's we want it to be thoughtful. Plus, you took the time to put these thoughts down and send it to us. I mean, it was addressed to us specifically, and we love receiving emails because it validates our existence.
So Zarish put it as Phil would probably wants to say, let's at least hope MP works on launch.
Knock on wood, or plastic, or silicon, or whatever.
Whatever you can find.
Yeah, I hope so as well.
That is just a generalization, of course. Well, yeah, we just hope the game works.
That would be nice.
We're pretty sure single player works. Multiplayer, we'll see.
We'll see.
Well, also not overly broken.
A little broken's okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like, hey, look, let's make 4 horsemen.
And certainly someone in the Civ community will find out something that wasn't realized by the developers, etc. during testing, and then they're like, oh, we should do something about that. But there's some egregious things that are like, really, guys?
Yeah, you didn't see that yourself?
Number 7, from episode 250, a detailed follow-up following an extensive consideration of a comprehensive subject, Civ Empire Management.
We have a response back from episode 244 from Mega Bears fan. My only point of contention with this basically is that it's long enough ago now that I don't even remember exactly what I said. So I've kind of had to infer it from reading through his response, but also our listening audience, including our live audience, probably doesn't have that, like, locked iron in their minds either.
Way to assume, Phil.
Well, you know how I put the emphasis in that word anyway, Dan, so nicely done. With that being in mind, he has a couple responses based on his suggestions that we covered in episode 244.
The overarching theme, Empire Management Design Philosophy.
For a Civilization 6, yes.
City sieges, talking about the possibility of them being damaged versus destroyed outright while being bombarded. I don't remember what I said back in the day when we did this, but that is, it's kind of like getting pillaged, but inside your city.
Yeah,
like he's talking about a cost benefit between length of siege and losses you're willing to take to your own forces, but I mean, really, you don't want to have a city under siege in the first place because that implies your tiles are being pillaged, and your units that were in front of the city are compromised in some way, or they're just horribly out of position. I'm not convinced that this needs to be. Well, of course it doesn't need to be, but that this would improve the strategy aspect of it. Like, you already don't want to be caught out to the extent that you have people able to hit your city significantly. That's already a bad position to be in.
Well, this is more from the attacker's perspective, I think. It's the concern of if things can be damaged when you drop bombs on them or other such things, then it's the question of, do you do it the slower way, but less damaging, or do you nuke it from orbit and then pick up whatever pieces happen to be left?
Unless people cannot get rid of their buildings themselves, you're not going to capture a city with buildings.
Well, even in Civ 5, you can only sell one building per turn, so...
Yeah, but if it looks like you're going to lose the city, I mean, I guess you could blitz it. Between the buildings you lose on capture and the tendency to sell, it's already a situation where you're unlikely to get a lot of useful infrastructure in a city you capture. You might, but you probably won't.
Well, I'm guessing he also assumes that the auto-deletion of X type of building might not exist anymore.
Yeah. I just don't see this as a strong strategic dynamic in most cases.
It's more subtle.
Yeah. It wouldn't, like, massacre the game. It probably wouldn't change gameplay a whole lot. But, I mean, I don't have a problem with it, I guess.
It makes me think, actually, a little bit of the, air quotes, peacekeeping topic we already addressed.
He next mentions the dead-end text and also made a comparison to both the Civ 4, like stuff like liberalism. I think Divine Right's an even better example. He's comparing him to Leaf text from Beyond Earth, so that there's some benefit to getting there early, but not necessarily later.
Some dead-end texts are probably fine, but whatever.
Have like a risk-reward type of thing, like it's a little bit better than following the standard path, but you have a risk that if someone beats you there, then you've committed resources to something that's actually giving you less benefit. Yeah, that's okay.
Or something.
I mean, Civ's done it to some degree all along. And I guess less so with Civ 5's tech tree, but you still have the wonders there, for example.
Yeah. There's still a Wonders tech in Civ 5 that is in main path.
Okay, his next point of contention here is climate change. And, man, I'm just going to take a sentence out of this. Like, if a mini ice age starts, you would have some indicator that temperatures are falling and winters are becoming harsher, so you'd have some buffer period in which to try to take action. Now, my line of thought here and my issue with climate change in general in these games is what exactly actions are you going to take within the framework of the gameplay? Exactly. What would that look like? I can't picture it from a Civ 4 or Civ 5 perspective at all, really. How are you going to prepare for this that's going to have a meaningful choice to make in gameplay without changing the scale of the game? To me, that's the biggest problem with these weather effects, is that if you're just having random event crap like Civ 4 implemented, it really doesn't add anything to the game. But if you know it's coming and can't do anything about it, and it doesn't change your decision-making framework in any significant capacity, it's not adding anything. So what are you doing to offset this ice age? And how are you making choices about it that gives you an advantage compared to other players who don't handle it as well? That's what I want to see, and I can't picture it while it's still having it plausibly be called climate change as opposed to some other mechanic.
Mega Bears fan says, I was not suggesting random weather events. I was talking about the game having a climate model that would cause gradual changes over time that have the subtle effects on the flow of the game.
That sounds good, but what does that look like?
My issue with that is less about what is the event, what is the scale, what is your ability to respond to it, but what came before that. If it's not just a random weather event, now whether this ties into realism or not, again, this is more about certainly gameplay consideration. Something that you did or didn't do. Whether or not this is also fun is also another question. But it could be something in terms of, could be, for example, you are over farming. Then you're taking the risk of, okay, I'm really going to tax this land that I have to the extreme because I've only got 5 grassland taxes. And I want to be able to push the production of the food on that so I can act like I actually have 6 or 7. At some point, there's the possibility that that system is going to collapse and there's going to be a drop in terms of food that you are able to get within the city itself. So then how are you going to compensate for that? Are you going to allow the city to starve? Are you going to try to get food imported from, like through a trade route, another city in your empire? Are you going to try to get food imported from another civilization altogether? That could work so long as I could say not only is this event that I'm presented with, there's something that I can do to mitigate it, but there was something that was going on before that particular point in time that I could look back and say, that was a risk. I took advantage of that, and now I'm having to pay the consequence, which may or may not happen, but that was reasonably going to happen given how extreme things that I was doing with the farming and over the length of time that I did it.
Here's the issue with mechanics like that. It reminds me of Civ 4 slavery and the events that gives you unhappiness from it. That can just hit at any time. The slavery in Civ 4 was so overwhelmingly favorable in the vast majority of starts that it was a false choice. It was strictly poor play to skip it as a civic. However, you could be punished or not punished randomly for making what is still, regardless of whether or not you're significantly punished for it, the superior choice. And to me, that doesn't feel like something where the player's success is being accurately represented by his choices. At that point, somebody can be very significantly hindered for making the same choice all of the other players made, and just the game decided that, hey, screw you this time. That doesn't really add anything to the experience, in my mind. And the climate stuff has that risk as well. Okay, I mean, we had a little ice age a few hundred years back that probably did not have much to do with human intervention, since our technology at that time wasn't at a level where we could impact the global scale that much. And you can have something like that in the game, but again, we have somewhere between 40 and 1 year periods between turns. That's going to come and go pretty quickly, relatively speaking. So what does that look like as a gameplay mechanic? And how do your choices really matter here? Are you going to make the same choice regardless and you're just randomly punished for it? Or is it something that's so marginal that your choices regarding it barely matter? To me, it's almost outside the bounds of core gameplay at the scale that Civ operates.
Yeah, a tightening up of turn years would matter for a lot of that stuff. And yes, there was a mini Ice Age, and yes, it had some minor adjustment to people's, in the grand scheme of things, it really didn't do anything.
And that's worth pointing out, too. Like, we know that Great Britain conquering a bunch of the world, or the Mongols conquering a bunch of the world, or Rome conquering a bunch of the world, whatever. Those are historical events we remember, and we can even, as relatively lay people, think about some of the impacts of that happening. What did that little ice age do exactly to a random nation in, say, Portugal or Central Asia or Egypt? What did that look like in each of those places respectively? And what choices did the nations historically make to offset the implications of that little ice age? Like, does anybody know that offhand? That's
no, that's the thing.
Maybe one person, but still.
I'm pretty sure none of them knew about it. It would have been a northern thing only, really, because it would have got colder and less food and yada, yada, yada. And some migration probably happened away from the north and or possibly a war or two over food stock or freshwater supply, stuff like that. But it would have been more localized up north.
Exactly, which is what I was getting at with my example.
That's a significant problem unto itself as well.
Yeah.
How do you represent that in a game that doesn't screw up the game's balance further? Because the last thing you need is with a friggin' tundra start is to get a little ice age screwing over your food supply.
Oh, God.
Why even put a civ there in the first place? Maybe when I was making my civ, I didn't want to start in the tundra.
Yeah. To go along with Dan's slightly different, not climate change model, more of
resource
land. Yeah, land usage model. I mean, that we could probably come in with something without people getting too bitchy about progressive silliness. Because it is clear that if you mass farm an area for a very long period of time, it will lose fertility. That is clear. It's just been done. Yeah. If you mass mine a hill, eventually you take all the stuff out of that hill and it's not really hilly anymore.
Well, usually there's not enough of the metal you're looking for, but you do run out of useful resources to mine from that hill, and then it's just a hill with nothing.
Yeah, or maybe you blew up the hill because now you wanted more land for building stuff.
Maybe, but that won't happen for most of the game's time period.
Yeah. No, well, actually, there are big mines that are currently under the city in London and stuff like that that used to be big hill mines, and they all just disappeared because they all get massively dug out, like gold.
That, and also, we know there are more resources right there, but given our current level of technology, it's not economical for us to be able to extract that in usable quantities. Maybe just even mining a hill, for example, if you improve that early on, then at some point it's okay in order to maintain that particular production on the hill and recognition of, you've been mining this hill for a while. At some point, while you're going down the research path, you want to pick up this particular technology. So at this particular point in time, your mine doesn't go from, say, 4 hammers down to 3, but then you pick up that particular technology. That's reflective of the fact we have improved our mining operation so that we can now get to that additional resource, abstracted lowercase I here, not a strategic resource, although you could do that with that as well, in order to be able to continue to get that production as time goes on. But again, like with the farming thing, it is very localized, and it's specific to that city or cities within your empire that applies to. But it also wouldn't be a substantial degree that, number one, it would cripple you, even temporarily, let alone anyone else in the greater wide world knowing what's going on or, quite frankly, even caring.
Or you could blow it up, too. Like, if you're actually pillaging, maybe you pillage the gold tile and you get a bunch of gold out of it, and then there's less gold there to be mined later. So maybe all land improvements have, say, 100 points worth of turns, like 1 point per turn, worth of stuff that they can use from it before it has to either get changed to something else. Say if it was farmed, you could switch it off to something that's not farming for a while and not waste the fertility. Or if it's a mine, before that resource specifically on that mine goes away. You probably need more resources in the overall game map because, well, eventually you dig everything out. But yeah.
Would you mind giving this hill a little rest for a little? Yeah.
You can definitely have some balance with that.
Yeah.
Between, like, how you use your tiles.
As long as it's not the degree of, saltpeter from Civ 3.
Oh, God.
You can't build your units anymore.
Derp.
On that note, we're going to move on here on this response. Resource markets. Okay. I don't mind the idea of resource markets, but I want to first see an AI that can value resources plausibly within the context of just the gameplay. A horse for 2 gold per turn, for example. I mean, come on. the market value should be determined by what resources the Civ knows are available, but right now it can't determine market value on any basis whatsoever, aside from just a fixed value that's set. The AI is quite bad with this. If Civ 6 AI is better, then okay.
All that takes is writing a small chunk of code that replaces that set value with a calculated value. That is not exactly a hard thing to do. It's not about the AI, it's just...
It's not hard to write that code, but it's hard to write that code in a way that the implementation in the game is not going to look nonsensical in at least some contexts.
Oh, why am I thinking of black markets? And
everybody hates Montezuma, so I can sell him this iron for like 10 times the price. You're going to get players who will engineer situations where a given resource is scarce to the AI, and then just take all the deity AI gold, and then their income is going to be like deity AI income, like really fast.
Yeah,
and I'm not sure that's better for the game outright. Well, if you're like operating on a different scale, you have like a pricing model of commodities or something that you have to consider. Okay, but that's not what we're seeing from Civ 5 as feasible. Now, could it be in Civ 6? Yes.
But I think part of his point is don't go based on global resource, especially if there's not a bunch of those global resources being utilized.
Well, that I agree with. I mean, there's no reason to count things that nobody has.
Or is using. Yeah. So say I've got 6 horse locations, but I've only improved 1. And that's the only one you know about. Well, guess what? There's exactly 1 in the market. And it's going to be costly.
Well, the other thing is, though, like, sometimes you want that horse more than other times. So, okay, fine, I won't build horse units then, you know? It's after the chariot archer period, and I don't have a knight you use, so maybe I'll just go crossbows this time, rather than buying your horse for an exorbitant price. You have that kind of stuff, too. It's not that easy to do well. You can, but it's not that easy.
Mm-hmm.
Why do I just have this convoluted thought of it's like, Monty's like, hey, can I get some iron? No, I need them for my swordsman. Hey, Monty, can I get some iron? No, I need them for longswordsman. I get the tanks. Hey, can I get your iron? Yeah, sure. So you can build those units with the iron, and then after I declare war on you, you get the 50% combat penalty, number 1, and then I can get, some recycling credits for the iron that I take off of your dead corpses that my tanks run over.
Yeah.
Totally not feasible.
I'm recycling. I'm not polluting. No.
That's right. You can help against the climate change. You can punish Montezuma for his poor farming practices.
I mean, we could get really dark and say, so, about the corpses and using that for fertilizer.
Soylent Green is people!
You see, kids.
Yeah, at this point.
Anyways.
How do you get more coal? If you're using a coal to move a unit along the railroad, how do you get more coal? That's what comes to mind.
I assume you get your coal back when your unit gets off the railroad.
Oh, okay.
That's part of his point.
Oh, okay. Maybe I just misunderstood him in the first place. Because I remember, not liking the idea, and I don't have a problem with that now. So either I changed my mind in the interim, or I just didn't understand in the first place.
Yeah, he might have just been refining it, because we may not have understood it the first time.
Yeah, he might have changed what he said, too. That's possible.
That, too. Yeah.
If you want to have, a resource partially being used to move a unit more quickly, that's not necessarily a bad mechanic, and it does give some incentive to try and get more of that resource, so you have more flexibility.
Mm-hmm. So then you might have issues of people trying to kick the unit off the railroad because, damn it, I gotta move somebody else. Or
pillage your coal to cripple the mobility.
Yeah.
That would matter a lot more on a bigger map, incidentally, which I would like to see with 64-bit. That would help a lot with 1 unit per hex as well. More total hexes and less crowding.
Yeah, and Mega Bears Fan had published this list September of last year, and we talked about it as part of episode 237's recording, but it was an extended conversation, so yes, Mega Bears Fan, you got a whole episode. Dang, I got a whole episode, quote-unquote. Just try not to let it go to your head. I know it's difficult once you've got PolyCast fame to your name, but, you try not to let it just identify you that way.
Yeah. That's our job.
That's how it works.
Number 6, from episode 271. Taking exception to one's assertion that Civ EDU is a bad idea.
Oh boy, ramp up the troll factor. Civilization EDU, a quote-unquote bad idea, claims gaming critic.
David would like to have words with you, Mr. Gaming Critic.
Yeah, and what's actually kind of interesting is at certain times in the article, I'm wondering if he's really arguing that it's a good idea or a bad idea. It's good to acknowledge the side that you are not on. He does present that. But then at the same time, he starts making arguments, and I'm thinking, I'm sorry, which way are you going? But essentially, to distill this down, he thinks it's a bad idea for two reasons. One, Civilization, the gaming series, is a very Western, particularly American perspective on history, and promotes the Christian faith.
Okay.
And I could be making this case about Paradox, but I don't know about Civ.
Yeah.
Hello, did you catch the part where we could make any religion we wanted? It's not just Christianity.
By default,
there's the
every
symbols for
map
things
was
like
Hinduism and Buddhism. In Civ 4, like, you'd carpet Buddhism and Hindu, like, every freaking game. With Judaism third at that. That's not very Christian.
Now, the author of this, Sam Suzuki, does say, it's impossible to critique the actual piece of edutainment as little beyond a general outline of its purpose has been revealed, quote unquote. Yeah, but then his whole article is about, doing in fact just that. He says, but Civ's well-known formula can, quote, only lead to concern over how the game systems will actually present history, unquote. Well, don't we have general concerns about how Civ presents history regardless whether it's Civilization EDU or not? I mean, that's just inherent in the freaking game.
Every country you go to is going to tell the same part of history differently, depending on their biases.
He cites the linear process and historically untrue, quote-unquote, nature of the technology tree, that it's far too neat when reality was much more messy. Again, gameplay here, people, in part. And he also says, yet every development is true, it's perfect, and a step towards the end of the technology tree. And it's like, okay, well, part of me wanted to troll and be like, there was this technology web and Civilization Beyond Earth. But more than that, and he goes back to the West.
Imagine doesn't want to acknowledge that.
I know Imagine wasn't going to acknowledge it, so I did.
I'm acknowledging absolutely nothing in this article.
I'm not sure why we're giving it time of day, but, unless you just want to troll people, that's fine.
Well, it's kind of one of those things, if you're going to present an argument, then present an argument. It's not the Civilization idea is a bad idea, and I wouldn't say the Civilization EDU is a good idea. It's Civilization EDU is, I don't even know if I want to say it's a new take. It's a more focused take on Civilization, but what's really going to make this product, I mean, yes, there's certainly some implementation, but it's how it's going to be used in the classroom because it is a tool, and he acknowledges it as a tool. It is not a be-all and end-all. He says an educational tool bears a weight that a game does not. In the classroom, accuracy is required for any kind of real usefulness. And it's like, there's accuracy, and what do you mean by accuracy? What do you mean usefulness? Civilization is a lot about what-if scenarios. What if this happened? What if that happened? There are inherent abstractions. Again, this is a game. This is not intended to be an historical simulator. It risks teaching students that science has always been a monolithic linear project, that battles are like chess, where pieces are cleanly wiped out by others, that everything is fundamentally reducible to a Western experience. No, what Civilization EDU seems to bring out, just like any Civilization title, is people claiming absolutes like this, and I would like to think that this person would like to engage in conversation. He links to his Twitter account, but guess what? His tweets are protected.
Yep.
Okay, so I point this out not just to criticize the article itself, but yes, to put out there that number one, some people think that this is a bad idea, but at the same time, some people also think that this is a good idea. It's an idea. Part of the good and the bad is going to be the implementation by Glass Labs, who is doing Civilization EDU. But the big mark is, how is it going to be, is it going to be used in the classroom, number one? And if so, how is it going to be used? And that's going to come down to the human factor, not the game factor.
And also, it depends on what you're using this as a tool for. Like, I'm just reading the last bit of whininess about Civ not being accurate enough about history, and that Civ game is not meant to accurately reflect history.
No kidding.
Yes, but it's not like they said this was going to be a history class tool. They didn't actually say what they're using this Civ for. It could be a thought-building tool, problem-solving tool, all sorts of other potential brain activity-related things that could be used for that. No one has specifically said, hey, you know what? We're going to use this to explain history.
So did you know that rulers lived for thousands of years back in the day?
Come on.
After the Great Divide, however, time slowed down and people died more quickly.
I don't think that making Civilization as a tool for learning history is good at all. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess it is for like first grade.
Trying
Or,
to
I don't
garner interest at all, that kind of thing.
Yeah, like,
hey.
like cool, goofy-looking leaders and Cleopatra and pyramids and, like Chinese Great Wall and so on. But if you're going to point out a game where you can learn history, that would be, I don't know, Crusader Kings, or Europa Universalis. More than this.
But even those don't fit history.
Yeah.
Pretty egregiously deviate from it.
Yeah.
No, okay, but you can learn how the world flows, like interconnections, why certain civilizations went into conflict with others, and so on. I think Civ is just a game, like it's a cool game, but I don't think it's a history learning tool.
Yeah, and did they really say that they were teaching high school students about history? Really?
I don't know. It's like a really cool idea for small kids as an introduction to history and how fun can it be. And how, technology has advanced through the ages and how civilizations grew but it's a game.
Yeah.
It's not a historical simulation of any kind.
No, if it's not being marketed as that. I mean, they're talking about that using it in high schools, but at the same time, it's kind of like the guided tour with the game. If the response from the educator was, okay, here's Civilization EDU, we're presenting it, we're going to learn history. Now learn history through the game. That's more on the educator than the game. That's not the game's fault. That's, okay, you see we can do this in the game, and then you use that as a conversation point. Like, okay, we can do this in the game. Why can we do this in the game? How does that relate to what actually happened? You kind of get a sense of, and like some people are also getting at, you're getting an interest in history. It's kind of a springboard.
Declare a holy war.
It's like, okay, this is how it was like in the game. Now let's talk about what really happened. And there are scenarios and there are mods that try to be historically accurate, and you can have that within Civilization, or you can have that within any game. So I think, yes, that this game can be not just necessarily limited to high school students, although that seems to be the big push from Glass Labs, because they're talking about getting it into every American classroom next year, which of course is a whole other side conversation. But regardless even of whether we get into regardless of age considerations, maturity, etc., it's the implementation, and part of that is the game, and the person acknowledges here we actually don't know what the game looks like other than it's based off of Civilization 5. Well, shoot, that's a very open-ended statement.
If you're using any game or anything to teach history, at least in my opinion, from my experience when I was in high school, the biggest problem was getting the context right. Like why things happen, why things happened, getting a feeling, a sense of why things work the way they work. And I don't think Civilization in any shape or form is good for that. In that regard, Paradox games are much better if they are applicable, but I guess not. That's the main problem of history, to understand the mechanisms why things happened, why the Civil War in the United States happened. Really, why? What were all the factors and all the different opinions and lifestyles and economic basis of the South and the economic basis of the North and intercontinental relations and all that stuff. Having a game that provides you with a context where you can visibly see the context, I guess a game would be great for that, but Civilization doesn't offer that. It's a board game in a sense, like you have a civilization, you have the United States on the map from the start of the game, and it spreads through the whole continent before 1 AD. So it would have to be drastically changed for it to become a history teaching tool, in my opinion.
It's not that Civilization is education. As you say, it is an educational tool. And for the context, the educator needs to know their stuff. Just like with anything in the classroom, what is the purpose? What is the point of this? How am I communicating that to the students, and how do I know that the students actually get that from that game at the same time? That's ultimately what it comes down to.
Yeah, it depends on what they're using it for. It's a tool, so they can either use it well or not.
Why is San Francisco called San Francisco and not St. Francis? That's the context I was referring to, and Civilization doesn't have this.
It's not trying to say this is a history lesson.
Yeah, okay, but they're using it for something, right?
Like I said, they could be using it for problem solving, for logistics planning, for different ways to think about things.
Indeed. And it doesn't necessarily mean that in an educational context that they even have to be historical. It doesn't necessarily have to be a quote-unquote history classroom. It could be, problem solving, some abstract
Practice
thinking.
your diplomatic skills.
Of the end of a pointy
Might
stick.
also be a bad choice on that one.
You need to know your students.
You certainly learned a thing or two.
I just know that many cities in the world would be much better off if their mayors played City Skylines or SimCity 4, some weird stuff going on. But do you guys have some ideas on like your criticism, your comment on how civilization could be made into an educational tool? I'm really interested in that.
I think I've said that from my position generally, which is you have to root it in the educator. It's a tool. It's just like saying, hey, we're going to give you a digital projector. Or back in the day, we're going to give you an overhead projector. How are you going to use it? It's going to be, hey, kids, look at this overhead projector. Let's talk about the mechanics of the overhead projector. Well, how does that help us advance this English lesson or this history lesson or this math lesson? It's what is the purpose for that tool in the classroom? To say, look, cool, tool, let's play. Don't talk to me. I need 35 minutes to myself or whatever. That is actually purposeful, and it's connected to both the curriculum, but it's also connected to problem solving, these learning skills and work habits that translate beyond the classroom. Hey, okay, to some degree you're going to learn stuff because, quote unquote, you have to learn it for the class. But you want to feel like after playing the game, wow, I understand, if not specifically these are the steps that I need to take, I have a better understanding of where I need to go and or who I need to talk to take these steps because I went through this exercise that included playing this game. Whether it's Civilization EDU, it's just quote-unquote regular Civilization or some other game.
Yeah, it would even sort of work for an algorithms class, the high school level. Basis of algorithms is a series of steps with choices involved sometimes, and therefore try and teach them a strategy and get them to utilize that within the game and understanding that, you can make changes here and there to modify your algorithm or even just the overall concept of planning, which I'm sure high school students don't really know that much about. Stuff like that. There's some ways to utilize it. I mean, obviously you have to see what they chop out or add in. From Civ 5 to this. On the face of it, it's just a game. Hell, you could use it for making kids learn not to completely ignore everything. That whole instant gratification thing. Use it for making them learn that they're not always gonna get what they want.
Teach them about the benefits and drawbacks of nuclear warfare.
And messing with India.
That's right. This is why we don't mess with India, kids.
Yeah. I have a cool idea. What if the teacher told the kids that every time they don't do their homework, they have to skip a turn against other players? I think that would be a great tool to teach kids how not doing your job is going to be bad on the long run.
Oh, there's questions of it. Oh, man, that's a rabbit hole. Number 10, from episode 248.
And since it's history adjacent, historical accuracy questionable, but in most cases, but, Civ does pull things from history. Therefore, these things existed. Therefore, if you don't know what a hotcha is, or when exactly the Renaissance, or why things like that existed.
Yeah. You can blame Magin for that.
It actually took a little bit, but Mackie finally did sigh. Thank you.
You got something out of me and Mackie.
I was timing it.
Number 9, from episode 265. Exactly. I was going to say, speaking of filthy heathens. Wait, no. Relatedly.
What?
I'm just on a roll with the segues today. I tell you what. Beep, beep. There was a Firaxis live stream. Number 8, from episode 245.
Even though we seem like great, nice people when you listen to us, we can all be dicks.
Yep. Number 7, from episode 263. You see, kids.
It's older than everybody here.
Yeah, it seems like pretty well every PolyCast recording. There's always at least that preference once. You see, kids. And kids is a very generic term. It doesn't necessarily mean 17 and under. We're all kids once, or from our parents' perspective, we're always their kid. We're always their child. Aww.
Uh-huh.
And, in the same breath.
Exactly.
Number 6, from episode 266. But when Mackie, you were talking specifically about, what can I turn off? This is an old civvy talking. Sounds kind of strange, but anyway, an old Civ player talking makes me think about turning off the animated heralds in Civilization 2 was a sign that your computer configuration was weak.
Wow.
And it still is. I never had to turn off the animated heralds, by the way.
Always turn it.
Just as well.
But everybody turned off combat animations after a while, especially if you're playing multiplayer, because oh god, it takes so long, and you have a turn timer sometimes.
Number 5, from episode 248. Speaking of Civ and education, is the series in and of itself educational?
It's not the first time we've discussed this on the show, but it has been some time, and I believe the last time we did this, it was before Civilization 5, and there are a number of references in this resource to Civilization 5 from the Games as Literature YouTube channel, which is described as an endeavor that hope to advance the study of video games as an art form, both in culture at large and specifically in the academic world, with the byline, and by byline I mean the description of the video. The Civilization series is all about history, but can it actually teach you about it? Published on the 1st of February, just under 1,000 views as of this recording. The video runs just a little under 9 minutes in length. The author, the Games as Literature professor, quote-unquote, describes Civilization as having a complex relationship with history, and it can seem like a really educational game.
It doesn't have a complex relationship with history. Even Sid says it doesn't.
It can seem like a really educational game until it doesn't, quote-unquote.
Why am I caring about this?
Generally speaking, educational games tend to be very direct in their approach. All games that are clearly gamifying the process of learning subjects covered in grade school and, less commonly, middle and high school. Very few educational games bear much resemblance to more typical games, and only so many of them are actually much fun at all, since it's hard to teach through gameplay without basically turning the gameplay into fancy-looking homework. Few games bridge this gap with much success, and they tend to be for younger children. Civilization is not that kind of game, but it's also far from the only game to have a lot of educational potential by simulating a subject.
And then the author of this video, who's also featured in the video, starts talking about tangential learning.
Process wherein learning is facilitated and inspired rather than being directly communicated. It's a general principle of human behavior that we learn better when we're engaged in what's going on, which means that inserting something we need to know into something we already care about has the potential to get us interested and inspire us to learn more on our own time. Civilization is something of a goldmine for tangential learning about history.
Okay, that I can agree with.
And he goes on to talk about the Civipedia.
Yeah, that the most important tool for learning this in this series is the Civipedia. I would not go that far. I mean, yes, you don't even have to leave the game to find out more about anything that interests you, but I'm not really certain that just consulting the Civipedia in and of itself is actually inspiring you to learn more on your own. On your own time. I mean, it's part and parcel with it, but the Civipedia isn't just about the historical aspect of the Civ. Someone could be looking up the Civipedia because it's, okay, so what's the game mechanic that's associated with this? What's the unique building again? What's the unique unit? Oh, yeah, right, and completely ignore anything that has to do with quote-unquote history.
Yeah, except, as has been constantly talked about many times, oh, hey, look, this Civ is in the game. What is that Civ? I've never heard of that before. I gotta go look that up.
That, yes. Now, that makes sense. That's the spurring interest to actually learn history as opposed to just learning about a quote-unquote a take on history.
Yeah. And since it's history adjacent, historical accuracy questionable, but in most cases, but, you know, Civ does pull things from history. Therefore, these things existed. Therefore, if you don't know what a hota is, or when exactly the Renaissance, or why things like that existed.
Yeah,
it actually
you can blame Magin for that.
It actually took a little bit, but Mackie finally did sigh. Thank you.
You got something out of me and Mackie.
I was timing it. Granted, as it says, maybe the kids' version, like the simplest possible version of whatever that thing in history is, happens to be in Civ. It's not a Civilization teach you history game, because that would just be weird. But yeah, the Civipedia has plenty of historical commentary or related info on stuff in a game. They do throw that in there. It's not just for mechanics. But of course, you would also have to assume that Civipedia is actually accurate, and sometimes it's not.
Yes, you can write something that sounds very official and factual, and in fact is not.
Yeah.
Or at the very least, that's one interpretation, but we don't know, or we don't reasonably know, but you've construed it as fact, when in fact it is a theory, or even quote-unquote more generally just an opinion, even if it's an educated one.
Yeah. Oh, it's a fact. Fact. I said fact on the internet.
Dang. Foiled by my own rules. Ah!
La 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 la.
And the video also talks about that the actual progression of a game of Civilization is not historically accurate, to say the absolute least. Well,
of course not.
Duh.
Burp.
But that's not my favorite quote.
Taken at face value, I think it's obvious that we can't really call that educational. It makes National Treasure look like a documentary in comparison.
Wow.
Whoa.
That's, I think you said that more for shock value than being factual, but still.
Totally.
That was a good one. It was also nice to have that little bit of humor in there. Like, that's tongue-in-cheek. I don't believe he thinks he's being serious, nor is he purporting to be serious. But it is a subject that is taken otherwise seriously throughout that. So that bit of humor, especially when you're not expecting it, is just kind of like, wait, what? Oh, and maybe that'll inspire you to look up, what is National Treasury? Oh, yeah, now I've learned something.
What is a person doing on the internet talking about history? I should go look that up.
Something that is not brought up in this at all, and it's about using Civilization in the classroom. As a teacher, I can tell you that it would not be something where I would say, here, play Civilization. You will learn history. Actually, before I even get to how could I use Civilization in the classroom pedagogically, it's how can I do this financially? Because
that's a lot of copies of Civ.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, see, there is no educational version of Civ like there is for Minecraft, for example. And then there's also the technical requirements for the game that often computers in school labs, they're really not going to be meeting the minimum system requirements anytime soon.
The larger takeaway from this is that video games absolutely can help us learn while entertaining us. And in fact, oftentimes, this medium is at its best while it's teaching us something through the worlds and the stories and the gameplay that we enjoy so much. So, here's to a series that's trying to do just that.
Yes, sometimes, if someone is learning, don't point out to them that they're learning necessarily. What it really reminded me of, I don't know if anyone on the panel played this, it was an early 1991 game. It was called Math Castle. And there's other Math Castle like websites now that are a complete bastardization of it. See, that was what I would call edutainment. And he talks about those games that are more direct in their approach, which includes Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego? Although I think Where in the World Carmen Sandiego is a little better than Math Castle, because Math Castle was very overt, which was solve math problems, prevent invaders from taking down your castle. Mm-hmm. Whereas in something like Civilization, it's about the first, and hopefully the idea is that it is fun first and educational adjacent second, as opposed to some other games where the purpose of this is it's educational. And if you have some fun in it, well, that's great, because Civilization is not edutainment, nor should it be treated as such. It is, as we're saying, a means to an end. In other words, maybe you weren't interested in learning about history until you played the game. Maybe you're still not interested in learning about history because you've played the game. But it's one of those games where it can go beyond the simple act of playing the game. You get into the meta game where you, for instance, start holding grudges for across many games for a particular civilization.
Shaka!
Or you read about what a civilization did historically, and you decide that in-game you are going to crush them no matter what, or you want to play them no matter what. You want to vindicate them in-game for having been vanquished in the real world. That is a big reason why you would want to come back to Civilization again and again. Certainly for me it is. Reimagining history. It is not a historical simulator, other than you could minor niche in terms of some historical scenarios, but even then there's some abstraction within there. So yes, ask the right questions is what we're getting at. Is Civ fun? Yes. Can Civ help you learn? Yes. Is Civ a history lesson? I surely hope not.
I think you'd learn about how to bribe other countries into fighting other countries.
Hey, shaka!
Well, there are some historical lessons in that.
But not quite. No.
Dear 2K, we hear you're trying to get Civilization in schools. This is going to corrupt young people and wanting to take over the world. Signed, ESRB. Oh, man.
Oh, no. People want to take over the world after playing Civ.
Number 4, from episode 254, raising competing claims for longest lasting unit in Civ 5.
So, over on the Civ Reddit, trying to read this name, Rascar26. The print's so small on that. Anyway, he wanted to talk about the long-lasting unit. He said, what would you say is the most durable unit in the game, i.e. the one that is in some way useful for the longest time? Well, workers, just to start you there. But I think he means military units. Because he said he would probably say the crossbow, because it starts in the medieval era. It's still fairly common in the modern era. What are you playing, man? I have seen it still have a role to start.
For happiness if you ran honor.
Yeah, but also I've seen it still have a role at the start of the atomic era.
Well, this tells me that perhaps he needs to increase his difficulty level. If when he's in that era, the AI is far enough behind that the crossbow is still effective.
He's saying it's not a frontline unit. He's using it to, wear things down from range or pick off a rifleman or something while your modern units do things, but...
stops doing damage eventually. I have used them into the early to mid-industrial if I happen to get them to the point where they have range and logistics. Because at that point, you might as well bring them along. They can shoot enemy units from areas that your other units can't, except for artillery with setup time. So they have some use there to double-shot enemies from really far away. Fine. It's not a lot of damage, but it's some damage. You might as well use it. But even so,
I think my use for them in that era would be just to keep them at home for defense, where I could upgrade them if the defense is actually necessary, but I probably haven't bothered to upgrade them until I actually get attacked.
I think I might have them at home if I have adopted oligarchy under tradition, because then, they're not costing any maintenance, but I might also be using them for happiness purposes as well. But yeah, like Ray, if then that city then became threatened, then I could turn around and upgrade them.
And the Gatling guns? I would much rather have Artie in a city than a Gatling gun, unless the Gatling gun is just, uber promoted, but then I'd rather use it, offensively.
Well, that's kind of incidental. It's okay, well, I have this unit, it's stationed in the city, okay, it's not costing me any maintenance, I don't really want it on the front line anymore, I'm not so concerned about, if I delete this unit, or just, upgrade it and have it, become cannon fodder, then I release that gold. But yeah, it would be pretty rare that I would have a crossbowman sitting around in modern era, let alone atomic. But, anyway.
Some city on the back front line maybe was plonking at barbs for a really long time, but I'd be surprised to find that many.
Oh, I know what could happen. You intended to set wait until healed.
Oh, and you said fortify? 10,000 years later.
Well, we're quibbling with the length of time that he says, but I think he has a point in that the crossbow is probably one of the longer-lasting mainstream military units.
If you don't count the upgrade path, I would agree. It probably has the biggest usage window without factoring upgrades.
Well, are we considering special units? Because the Camel Archer is clearly the number one here.
So that's why I said of the mainstream units. What I meant was non-unique by mainstream.
He did also highlight knights are still good for pillaging, which is true. It doesn't matter. A fast unit that can run in and pillage the crap out of everything is still good, even if it's probably going to get shut off by the city, but hey.
Of the unique units, I think the Assyrian siege tower is probably the one that I use most after it should be outdated, just for the sapper bonus.
I agree with Ray. Of all the unique units, and I also agree that in terms of mainline unit would be crossbowmen, but definitely the Assyrian siege tower replacing the catapult. I know, and it came up in the thread, someone said, well, what about the Hunnic battering ram? Okay, it's true that the battering ram does come at the ancient era instead of classical, and there is nothing quite like being the Huns and moving a...
carpet of battering ram doom.
Wander into a camp, instead of becoming a spearman, become a battering ram. That's great, but seeing as how the battering ram has a 33% increased cost, it's got a negative on defense, and as Ray was saying, the sapper promotion, it carries over, and sapper promotion when you're next to an enemy city, other units within 2 tiles get a 50% bonus when attacking the city, which includes other siege towers, which includes when it's embarked. Oh, and the Assyrian siege tower, unlike the battering ram, also gets extra sight. So it really has, I would say, almost way too much use, especially when it's a unique unit. Like, to me, it's kind of like a subset of this conversation. It would be nice to see that a mainline unit actually be the longest-lasting unit, mainline combat unit, because, yes, I agree with Mackie. If we're talking about long-lasting units, yes, workers. But in terms of combat, I really wish the answer was a mainstream unit, because a unique unit should not be the longest lasting. It should be specialized for a particular era when it is stronger than others. And yeah, okay, maybe it then carries over into another era after that due to its combat experience and promotions that you get. But man, it is hard to compete with the Assyrian Siege Tower, although I would say the closest to that would be the Ship of the Line from England. But seeing as how most of the combat in most games is going to be on land, then I would say Assyrian Siege Tower, plus the fact that it's available in the freaking Classical, as opposed to having to wait until Renaissance for the Ship of the Line, that gives it the edge.
Horse Archer wins.
Wins what?
Life. Civ.
Well, if it may very win life, but it's not going to win this title of longest lasting unit for durability. It's a 5.
Well, it's available in a very early era, and it stops being good when exactly?
Probably
Cavalry.
late medieval.
Cavalry and Lancers will crush them.
Yeah, mid-Renaissance is when it stops being effective. But that's a long
But Camel Archers,
yeah,
those
but you
are
don't
good until bombers.
Yeah, but you don't get them until medieval.
They last until Great War bombers. That's crazy.
I'm not sure that's actually a longer period of time on the tech tree, though.
Just remember that the Assyrian Siege Tower gives a 50% bonus to other units within 2 tiles when attacking a city, regardless of subsequent era. I don't know how you can beat that for the Sapper promotion alone. If there wasn't the Sapper promotion, this might be a more interesting conversation. But I'm dropping the mic, boom, Siege Tower.
The embarkation is what makes it last a really long time, because at some point the defense is going to be that it gets killed too easily. But since you can embark it and protect it with a ship, use that trick, its usefulness is pretty much forever.
No way. Once you get the nukes, it stops mattering.
Okay, Grim.
And on the siege towers, in addition to being protected by ships at sea, as Ray was saying, another nice thing about it is that even on land, you can have it so that whatever unit is either bombarding the city or it's another melee unit attacking the city, you can have it so that the siege tower is out of bombard range of the city and whatever units are in there as well, to give it added protection even on land, because of course you can't stack one land unit on top of another land unit, well, and end your turn anyway.
But the cyber bonus doesn't work unless it's against the city.
I still say Assyrian Siege Tower, but Impies might be my number 2 just because of their anti-gunpowder bonus.
They're okay, but their upgrade path makes them really a tough sell.
Well, I know for a lot of people their Troll Dan ability is high, but why is that the first thing I thought of when Impies were said? And it wasn't even Phil that said it.
Weird.
Impy would also be very strong because not only what it replaces, but its ability to carry over into the next era, even if it hasn't had any combat experience, and I don't know why you would construct them and not have that experience, but that ability for that strength plus the unique ability that they can have.
They get like a small attack before they do their real attack, basically.
Yeah, that's it.
But their ability to get 3 moves is what makes them more enticing in my mind.
True.
The other Buffalo promotions are pretty good too, but the 3 move is really nice on something that does not share cavalry's weaknesses and has that attack in addition.
The mounted moves without the combat penalty against cities.
Yeah, or the weaknesses, for that matter.
Number 3, from episode 253, getting competitive in discussing one's favorite era in Civ 5.
Thread started by General Carlos. Hey everyone, just curious as to see what everyone's favorite era in Civilization 5 is. Mine is in the Industrial, because that's when my empires really start booming. And yes, I had to yell really, at least relatively speaking, because it is in all caps.
Yeah.
The ideologies start coming around, and the standard infantry units, riflemen, actually start becoming reasonable for warfare. So what is your favorite era? Well, I'm going to avoid pouncing on this wording of reasonable for warfare, because that's really not the point. In terms of responses, I went through and I tallied what people said was their favorite era, unless some people were like, oh, my favorite era is this and this, or it could be this or that. And it's like, okay, choose one. Ancient and Medieval were tied at 6. Renaissance. Yeah. Was it 5? Of course I had to do that. Followed by Classical, Industrial, and one person chose Atomic. I do not find myself in either of the leading categories or even in second place. My favorite era is Classical.
I gotta go with Industrial, because that's when the tall versus wide cancer starts to be removed a little bit.
Yeah, I think Industrial, I'm not surprised to see a lot of people pick that, because so many game options suddenly open up at the Industrial era. You know, you have the ideologies breaking open, you've gotten into rationalism, and mine is personally the Renaissance, because...
Do it.
I was going to go, don't do it!
You can start your exploration then, reasonably get the World Congress founded. I play a lot of Japan, and though Samurai is a late medieval unit, I often can break right into the Renaissance right after getting Samurai, and I'm having fun just steamrolling over anybody remaining on my continent at that point. I really feel like your empire by the Renaissance period has really coalesced.
Yeah, I agree. I'm like doing an early war usually like in the medieval period, and then I don't know, industrial, that's when I feel like the game either starts to run away from me or not, but the game's like still full of potential in the Renaissance period, especially if you get pikes before anybody else, which is pretty, I don't know, easy to do.
Pikes are medieval.
Are they?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I meant then.
Medieval. They're still useful in the Renaissance period.
Yeah, well, there's when you actually get the unit and when you can effectively use them.
I don't like how they upgrade, so you got to make the most of them.
Oh, yeah, up to Lancers.
While they're in medieval, you got to make sure you're using them well. The LKs that you get from Commerce are also really nice, and they're the same type of unit. You can use copy bows or chariots along with the pikes, it's fine.
It depends.
And if I'm doing early war, I like the early war. I love, if I have 4 horse or more.
Jaguar rush.
No, I'll do chariot rushes. The AI sucks at handling them so much, unless the terrain is just awful. You'd be surprised. On Immortal, you can still kill like 3 AI with the chariots.
I've enjoyed listening to my fellow co-hosts, see here listeners, talk about medieval or Renaissance or industrial and try to parse, which is which and which is their favorite when, of course, everyone knows that they're completely wrong and it's in fact classical. The reason that I like classical, Phil mentioned this unit already, Composite Bowman, which was introduced in Gods and Kings. To me, unless you're one of these late starts people, and, we've talked enough about you on the show, which is, I know, like next to never.
It's like, shut up, late start people.
Okay, there is the snowball effect, and I can hear some people saying, Dan, that would be ancient era, hello. Yeah, but ancient era, you're setting the foundation. You're setting things in place in terms of, okay, I hope that I'm able to do this.
Yeah, you're building chariot archers. It's your foundation.
Whereas to me, classical, kind of your first test of how solid your foundation is. It comes from Composite Bowman, to me, to be the primary component for those early rushes of city-states and or civs proper, whether you're going to wipe out a civilization completely or not. It's also that era that you start building your economy, you get currency, you get philosophy for your national college. You start getting a little more sense of what strategic resources are available on the map and available to you. You can get the Writers Guild, so you're starting to work your specialists in your city. Your cities are starting to grow. You're looking at your first happiness buildings, like a Colosseum, for example. Your cities are starting to get larger and are in need of some assistance for food, so you can start constructing aqueducts. To me, and this is based on my own experience, how well you do in classical is going to determine considerably how well you are going to do in subsequent eras. And you could say go back and say, yeah, but how far back do we want to go? But to me, classical has a lot of interesting decisions to be made and a lot of what-if scenarios that you can still be playing out in your head, which at times can be overwhelming, but particularly once we get to industrial and the ideology start coming out, I mean, yes, it definitely helped the late game, and Civilization needed that, and not just Civilization 5, and Civilization 5 does that well. But in terms of possibilities and the exploration phase that's still going on, it may not be the best era. And again, it wasn't the question of best. It was a question of favorite. So for me, that's why classical holds a near and dear place in my heart.
We all know why Dan actually likes the classical era. It's because you can build the Great Wall.
Of course. I'll put it number 2, though, and something very worth pointing out. Ancient era, a lot of your choices are made for you by your terrain, who's near you, and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to get your best tiles, your luxuries, all that set so that you can progress with just either growing or building military units. But a lot of those choices are just experience. Classical, you have real trade-offs, and they affect you for the rest of the game. Like Dan said, if you go down the composite bows, if you really want to hit somebody fast with composite bows, if you really want to maximize their window of effectiveness, you are necessarily going to delay your national college at least to a degree. Your social policy choices might be different if you're doing that versus if you're not. You can make a real case for going liberty if you need the early hammers for those kinds of rushes and you need the happiness for meritocracy for the cities. it makes a big difference. And it's the same thing if you're on a watery map and you're trying to decide between wrecking someone on your continent versus getting your naval game going. You have that choice to make as well. And your national college timing really does vary quite a bit depending on your social policy choice. So there's a lot going on there.
National colleges for a plus 50% boost.
But you have to evaluate if it's worth going for. That's part of the reason I would probably grade that out as my second favorite. But just having the ability to start taking over the world in industrial is why I favor the industrial era. But in terms of meaningful choices, classical is probably where the most are in a typical game.
As long as no one says that classical is their least favorite era, then we're fine.
I don't think anyone's going to pick it as least favorite.
Well, maybe someone will pick it as their least favorite now because they want to fight me. Wow.
I'd love to be funny. I'd love to be funny and say that Future Era is my favorite, but I don't get to play Future Era often enough for it to be my favorite.
Yeah.
It ends very quickly when you nuke people and then drop XCOM next to their cities.
Yeah. I mean, that's fun, but I don't get to do it as often as I'd like.
And it's probably a little bit more enjoyable than bothering with space. Because it's not like the AI can penalize you for being a warmongering menace to the world or counterplay you at all, really. You just nuke their capitals down to nothing and then land a unit next to them and they can't do anything and you take it the next turn and then you win.
I will show you being a warmongering menace.
And some people listening to this might be saying, Dan, I'm on Team Classical like you, but you didn't talk about one of, if not the most obvious reasons to choose Classical.
The Great Wall.
No, Brendan.
Yeah.
I'm going to have a line for everyone where it's like, no Phil, no Brandon, they'll sue me, no Mackie, no Lisa's coming.
I feel like I've gotten a good thing started here. What?
No Phil. And some people are saying, Dan, the fact that you are most likely going to reach Classical Era, that is a reason to make it a favorite. Well, I think that might actually fall under a better argument in terms of best era, but that's even sketchy because I could see someone saying the fact why I like a later era is because I've actually reached the later era. I have demonstrated I have done well enough for the previous eras to still be alive. Okay, then there's questions of sometimes you don't just want to be alive, you want to be able to thrive as well, but that's a reason why I didn't mention Classical.
Hello, you play to win the game. Hello. Oh.
Although if someone says, I like information era, so I can win by score, we're going to have a little sidebar. We'll go off the live stream for that. We don't need anyone to hear that. This is Play Company.
So what is your favorite era then, Mackie?
I don't know. I don't think I've really thought about that. I play through things. I have fun. I'm supposed to pick an era?
You're supposed to pick an era.
That's what the topic says.
I mean, Mac, the fact that you were called out by a guest. Wow, that's
yeah, wrecked.
Whoa.
Well, maybe Renaissance, because you start getting some of the fun stuff.
Now, Mackie.
What?
You know why you said Renaissance. That's why you chose it. Come on, you can be honest with us. It's just you and I.
No, it's you and I and a bunch of other people and a bunch of people listening on the internet. And no, that is not why I picked it. Yeah. I've gotten to the point where I want to mute you guys every time somebody says that.
Even I do, and that's saying something.
Yeah, see, even Phil is just like, no, stop.
You know what the solution is?
Of course, we're just encouraging them to do it more, but that's besides the point.
The solution is build the Great Wall.
Yes.
Oh, Brandon.
Well, actually, no, if we build it, then it won't troll them very much.
Well, the buzzing's trying to call me out. I'm calling you out, Classical Man Dan. This Saturday night, me, you, in a cage, no holds barred. I'll give you a classical education in pain. I'm like, you can't handle the pain.
Oh, sure.
And I'm like, that you made it to the industrial era is a testament to the strength of your classical era.
Number 2, from episode 249. Finding common and uncommon ground all around on the suggestion of adding a pre-agriculture era to Civ series play.
A different pre-agriculture era. This thread brought to us by Dunk Leostosis. Dunk. There we go. Yeah, that's
Dunk.
That's Dunk. He said, separate from what I see with mods, I would like to see a pre-agricultural era where, quote, civs won't be able to found cities at the beginning of the game. They'll be able to explore the land around their spawn, however. Civs won't be distinguishable from each other at this point. If you happen upon another unit, they will be a generic nomad or some such label. Warfare at this stage would be difficult. Once a civilization is founded, individual nomadic tribes become these civilizations they were initially selected / were given. and goes into the more details about talking about having different food and production pools. Depending upon where a unit ends its turn, it may be able to then add more to its production or hammer pool. They can use the abilities to consume food and hammers in exchange for benefits. Production is primarily used to unlock tech innovations that may improve a unit's ability to survive. So, for example, a hunter that begins its turn on top of sheep or furs may spend production and the rest of its movement to develop cloth and clothing, which give units a 25% defense bonus against attack and allow them to enter snow tiles. I'd like other tech innovations, but I can't really think of any good ones. Perhaps more to develop culture, like jewelry or art or something. Artistic expression is obviously much older than this time setting. And one of the more interesting capabilities is that units may consume food to produce more units. For example, either another hunter or gatherer. What I actually like is subsequent conversation, which is, and to me, my kind of take was, so you're going to play this mini game within the game. Because then once you settle the tribe, then everything that you were doing before is now past. You can't do that anymore. We've got this divide between agrarian society versus pre-agrarian society. Whereas some people tried to say, even once you found a city, why could your civilization not then have components of both agrarian and quote-unquote pre-agrarian, where, for example, kind of took it that these nomadic civilizations kind of remind a bit of colonies in Civilization 3, where you would be able to, for instance, camp on a particular resource and then you have access to that resource. But it was vulnerable for someone to coming along and going, squish, I want to found a city here, squish, I'm going to force my unit, my technologically superior unit onto this tile, and you're not going to have the benefit to that anymore. To me, so long as it's not just, let's have pre-civ and then play civ, so long as there's some kind of holdover from what you have in the pre-agricultural era, just like certain decisions you make in the ancient era in Civilization 5 right now, it's not like, for example, okay, you've got this scout unit and you're going to help scout the land, and then once you found a city, the scout unit is gone. Or say in Civilization 4, oh, bye-bye scout and bye explorer, you don't have that anymore. No, there might be times where you actually want to be able to continue to use these units to get benefit to food, production, maybe even gold and culture. Some people say we've got to be able to incorporate that there, maybe even science, so that you can have a combination of those two, or you can, strictly speaking, decide for yourself, once I am able to found an agrarian society, I'm done.
I know, it struck me as sort of a very sort of kind of wildly swingy mechanic that's basically, it's going to have the effect of delaying some civs' founding dates of their first city relative to others, because essentially the way it's described, you're not going to have that much luck trying to attack random units, and you wouldn't know who you were attacking even if you did. So most people will be trying to build up as many units as possible, gather as much food as possible and food and hammers to get their first settler out and actually start being able to advance in their technology. And basically the first person to settle is likely to be the person who's got pretty good odds to win, because if you're starting 10 or 20 turns after that, then you're in a bit of a handicap situation there.
To me, it's almost even a minor grander consideration of, do I settle on turn 0 or do I move around some more to find a better spot?
Well, I think the way it's described, it sounds like the best move would be to find a decent food tile for your hunter or gatherer, sit there to gather enough food to make more hunters or gatherers, and there'll be some sweet spot where you're gathering enough food per turn that you're best off to wait for the settler next. But the idea would be to trade off between gathering food and hammers and exploring the map. But it just seems like you'd want to save the exploring for after you'd actually founded your city. And also, I suspect the sweet spot number might be somewhere around 6, because 6 you can gather your 6 units around your settler so that they're not disappearing and becoming barbarians, which he had described later in the post, that once you found your city, you've got 3 turns until any units outside your borders will become barbarian. Then you'd be smacked by maintenance costs, so maybe not as many as you can, but certainly as many as practical.
Yeah, that part actually struck me in particular as something that I wouldn't want, because, okay, you want to be nomads, you want to be able to explore, and I'm going to kind of set aside the realism aspect here in great part. I want to find where other civilizations are. I want to find where better land is that I might want to settle a permanent community and then grow that particular community. I've now settled a community. You better all get back here or you turn into barbarians. That, to me, is also part of the hard switch. It's like, okay, I've turned the switch off with this pre-game game, whereas I like the idea of not only would you not get a penalty for not bringing them back in, but it could be a supplemental, smaller bonus, like a secondary bonus, like having a colony in Civilization 3, where, not saying you're going to want to use this over the course of the entire game, but you don't want it to be able to say, well, it's almost always going to be then as soon as you settle the city, you are done. I guess you can get into questions of, do we really want to have this combination? Are we just making it more complex for complex sake? We want to make it fun, but I think it's something that can be explored to be made fun, which kind of comes up subsequently in the thread, just so long as, again, it's not just a game within a game and then that's the end of it. That would suck to me.
Well, I mean, you could make it that it's a scenario. You can just chop it off and call this first part a scenario. And then you can blow up the map so that your nomads aren't wandering faster than your tank. So you just blow up a section of a map and then find a space within your little mini game to settle, and then it would actually collapse the map into the actual game map. I mean, you could do that, but then there wouldn't be other civs wandering around the same map. And in theory, you probably should never be running into another civ per se, because then you're started way too close and you both become civs and you find out you're on border right away. And
yeah, you're 3 tiles from Monty.
Yeah, see, that would prevent you from being like, I'm going to play the bulk of this game as pre-agrarian. And by pre-agrarian, I mean not settling a permanent city. But yeah, then as soon as you run up against someone, it's either, oh, they're also pre-agrarian, or even worse, oh, they've already settled a spot, and now I'm particularly vulnerable to being squished. Let's get out of here.
Yeah, well, that's why I would suggest it be more of a scenario type that could be skippable, so that you could use it to do it, but then the outputs of it would lead into your actual game. Like somebody said at the bottom, agriculture is not necessarily the only way towards civilized life or permanent settlements. There could be a few extra ways of getting to that point, and then those choices define how you start in the actual game. So that you could play, say, Japan and do a bunch of sea-based stuff and maybe start with sailing instead of agriculture and go that way.
You were mentioning something about to have a secondary sort of smaller map or something to work with in this pre-game thing. Everything really has to be on the same map or else just kind of distracting from the game, and it kind of gets a bit confusing for the player, I would have thought.
Well,
but
so
yeah,
the whole point behind this is getting away from the game, right? You're already
well, yeah,
in
but
that,
I mean, I think the appeal to me, at least at the outset, was sort of the idea that you get the chance to explore the map beforehand. And it's sort of got a trade-off with the looking for food thing, but I don't think it's particularly done well in the sense it probably would be better if you ran out of food in certain spots, so you were sort of forced to keep moving on rather than just plonking you guys down on decent food sources and just leaving them there while you build more.
Yeah.
But yeah, as an idea for giving you, I don't know, 20 or 30 turns to explore your surroundings, this seems reasonable, but as described, I'm not that sold.
Yeah, I don't mind the early searching, because obviously you're going to know more about your starting area than you really should. I mean, as a function of early explorer, sure. Somewhere in there's talked about movable resources like cows and horses and stuff like that would run around. I kind of like that concept, because then, if you get to the quote-unquote animal husbandry tech, then you would actually lock down that resource in a tile rather than following them around. So if you have a horse resource, you can follow them around and get horse units.
Could be interesting. Although then you lose sight of the horses for a little bit until you get your animal husbandry again.
Yeah, invisible horses just don't make sense to me.
So they're actually unicorns.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because then you could possibly also modify your local map area at the same time.
Possibly. That's an interesting idea. So I don't know how you'd do it with the some of the resources, but certainly with the animals, sort of you could imagine herding them and dragging them into place, although then you'd be sort of running the risk of like people making ridiculously good starting locations. But then again, the more time you spend on dragging your animals around, the less time other people have already settled their city. So maybe it's an interesting trade-off.
Yeah.
Could be an interesting idea.
And of course,
capital at the expense of time.
Yeah, or you eat them all and it's too late.
I like the concept, but the devil is definitely in the details here.
Yeah.
It could be a lot of one step forward, 2 steps back, and in the practical world of game development, we only have so much time in a development cycle to look at such things to then decide, are we still going to commit the time and the resources to this? Is there enough here? I think there's enough to get started. Kind of like what LP and Matt have been getting at. Do I see in the thread, yes, we're at a point now where this sounds like a plan to actually put into place, to practice to see if it is fun? No, but I think there's enough there to get us started. Drew Zane in the chat says, I think the suggestion here is way too complex and will make new players be less interested in Civ.
Yeah.
As much as I've been pro-exploring this, I think you could also make some existing players of Civ not want to pick up the next title if you do this. So you have to be very, very careful when you're going to be tinkering with something that is so fundamental as the starting game. And if you're going to do that on paper, does this look like fun? And if it doesn't look like fun on paper, then it's probably not going to be fun in practice. But I think with a little more finesse, it would be worthwhile to try. Thread starter here was a dunk. He said, I don't want to do it like mods have done it because of this issue, and that issue, and that issue. Well, maybe, in fact, we perhaps should be looking at those mods a little more in particular and about why this works or why this does not work, because some people have already done some of the work to see if this can work and how could it work in game.
And obviously, just make it optional. Seriously. Just make it default off and people can turn it on. If
default off, you go into the normal Civ game, but this is an option if you want additional challenge or bonus.
Yep.
Yeah, I was totally mentioning this as just some sort of mod type thing, or perhaps just a checkbox type option. Not the default experience. I think by its nature, Civ, well, you've had 5 games now where you're starting with your settler and maybe a worker or something, and maybe a warrior, but the whole settler start thing is sort of ingrained now, so I don't think you can change that in the base game, but maybe you can have an option for people who want to play with a bit of flavor.
If we're going to do this, then let's actually do this. I wouldn't want it to be, we're going to have it in the game, but let's just have it an option that you can toggle on or off. Can we get to the point where it's going to be reasonably fun for most players, however we're going to define that? And I hear the argument about, well, we're going to change something so fundamental as what we've been used to in 5 games. Some people said that about, and I know I'm kind of going out there when I say this, but there were these things called hexes that were avoided. Oh, no, this is not going to be too complex. No one's going to like that. I can't imagine going back to squares. Honestly. Now, am I saying that this is going to be successful or this is worthwhile simply because of that comparison? No, I'm just not ready to write it off as something that either you're going to have it in the game and then it's an option you can toggle on or off. I would rather see it not be in the game at all than have that option toggle on or off.
Well, then you suck.
Well, that is a brilliant counter-argument, 10-year-old. I applaud you.
The only way to do it properly is to make it optional.
Make it optional, but on by default, and I think that would be reasonable.
Yeah, either way. It doesn't matter one way or another, as long as it's optional.
Because you can, disable barbs and stuff if you want, or anything, really. So, it wouldn't be inappropriate to have it as a toggleable option.
Although his whole concept of barbs would not exist until you settle.
I know, but I'm just saying, as an example of the current game state, there are long-standing Civ traditions that you can just straight disable if you want.
Yep. I think there is potential for a pre-4000 BC start. You know what I'd like? Not a 4000 BC start, because civilization started long before 4000 BC.
Imagine with a 4001 BC start.
Wah, wah, wah.
Ha ha. Snark.
My main thought actually on if this was something that was in the default game, then you'd run into the issue of how do you make this pre-game variable enough that it's feeling different each time? Because the whole thing with starting with a settler that you can found a city with is that you immediately have the decisions of what am I building, what am I researching? Whereas if you're just moving units around the map, I mean, a little bit there, but I don't know if it's enough that you'd want to be doing that every single game.
Yeah, so that's why I would think that we'd have to change some of the ancient era stuff as well, so that agriculture is not the tech that you technically start with, that there would be alternates and alternate paths into it, that you maybe not even need agriculture whatsoever if you're on an island that has
you need fishing and sailing.
Yeah, not agriculture. You'd also have to make it so that those choices matter to the main game. So maybe you get to being a Civ via sailing, but without agriculture, a lot of that, say, construction and other passive societal agri-life sort of stuff just is not as easy to get as if you went sailing.
What you do in the early game maybe gives you a bonus of some sort, such as a Civ flavor or something?
Oh, you don't even choose Civs anymore. Haha, you just start with a person, and then you have to build your way up, and where you start and what you do defines what Civ you got.
So if I start on an island, I take fishing, I'm suddenly Japan.
Yeah.
This I like, not necessarily specifically, I do like some of the specifics. This is the type of the conversation where it's, okay, how do we make it so that it is not a pre-game, but it actually is within the game itself? We want it to be able to feel like it is as seamless a transition as possible where you're completely pre-agrarian, and then you have agrarian, but then I would also like to see, again, back in some respects, that the pre-agrarian, you don't have to continue using it, but you can continue using it, just like you have considerations of, okay, once you get to turn 10, wherever you are now, you now must settle. No, you want to be able to have it so that there are potential good things and bad things that can happen depending upon when in the cycle you decide that you want to go from pre-agrarian to agrarian and then have some kind of hybrid or not. This is good. This is what I'm getting at. Exactly.
You might want caps on those food and production pools, because otherwise somebody's just going to sit there and mine a bunch so they can start insta-building shit when they put down their city.
We would totally throw away stuff like that. Totally throw that out. There would have to be a way for defining how you got to things. Like, maybe it's all about what you do. If you spend a lot of time around horses and sheep, then you would push more towards animal husbandry and maybe some civ that has benefits towards horses. And if you spend more times around plantationable things, then you move towards more agricultural style of stuff. Or if you just run around constantly, maybe you just turn into, like, Shaka, because you don't know how to settle.
What you're doing in the early game has consequences, good and bad, for what then happens past that particular point, that it can all come back to, oh, it actually did matter what I did from turn 0 to 10, because this, that, and that. It could be something really small for over the course of the entire game, something really significant at the beginning of the game that then has a lasting effect. Something that you just can't say, okay, well, those 0 to 10, we've been there, done that. Now let's get on to the quote-unquote real game. If that's how this is going to be treated, then don't treat it at all. Let's not even start.
Yeah, impacts matter. But maybe, you find a natural wonder. Gods are in there. You start with polytheism.
Jazane in the chat. First, you built a wonder. Would you like to be Egypt? Oh, I know. You founded a city on the coast. Would you like a trade agreement with England? No. Or you killed a city-state. Would you like to be Dan the Mongolian? Drew, why would I kill a city-state? I can't bully them for their gold anymore. What are you talking about? That seems suboptimal.
You have to bully.
Number 5, from episode 258.
Tall empires are dead. Stop using that terminology.
That would be nice. I'll believe it when I see it, but that would be nice.
It is official. It's been facted now. See?
Okay.
Fact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
There shall be no such thing as a city-state-sized empire that calls itself a civ.
Number 4, from episode 252.
Yes, if you have tons of Martian floodplains, the Dutch boulders go silly. And it makes the map look pretty. So there's that too.
Oh, there's nothing prettier than a boulder.
Or like an entire field of boulders.
That should be on a t-shirt. There's nothing prettier than a boulder. I just walk around.
What do you mean? There's something definitely more pretty. It's the glowy radiation after a nuke strike.
That's true. That is a fact.
But
in fact,
you can have both of those things at the same time.
It is true.
But then the tulips look weird.
Number 3, from episode 256.
But I want to know, and of course is the most important thing for religion. Not really, but I'm going to say it anyway. If I can't rename my religion, then I don't want the mechanic. Get rid of it.
Dan can't live without his condorism.
The mighty condor must rise again.
That sounds so wrong.
Number 2, from episode 253.
Brandon actually asked to do the introduction.
What?
Which is like
Great.
the opposite of everything, and we've entered an alternate universe.
Well, he's a returning co-host, so he probably just wanted to.
Lisa, how many were co-hosts? Forget everything.
That hasn't exactly helped us in the past very much.
Number 1, from episode 248, discussing whether the use of tiles or hexes is fundamental to the game Civ series.
Alright, so, by Supremacy King 2, how important are tiles and hexes to a Civ game to be true to the Civ format? Put differently, if Civ 6 used a map with regions like Europa Universalis...
Oh, God, let me start banging my head against the wall.
How about a mechanic that works? But yeah, okay, so if Civ 6 used a map with regions that were functional, would that be considered heretical and unciv? Is that like unsim in Madden? The reason I ask is because I see many advantages to a regions-based map. It would fit the scale of Civ better. I'm not sure that's true, actually. One turn equals 10 years or more, it makes more sense for units to move from a region to another region than to only move from one hex to another. It's... okay, I'll just keep going for now. And regions would allow settlers to colonize a nearby region for military units to conquer an adjacent region in a couple turns, rather than units taking multiple turns, hundreds of years, just to move from a city to their target location. Yeah, this is basically...
Keep reading. It's
okay, all right. Regions would also allow more beautiful and more realistic maps, since maps would no longer be a collection of geometrical hexes. You could have more natural-looking maps that look like real Earth. You could also have more natural-looking borders where your empire is continuous territory instead of the hodgepodge of semi-connected hexes in Civ 5. Regions would also fetter AI pathfinding, since it's easier to program the AI to make units from one region to the next rather than programming a specific hex to the hex path. A hex is a region. Just saying. I mean, it's a specific, very rigid, fine region, but it is a region. And when you're generating maps, it seems like X's win, because I don't know if you've looked at Random New World either before or after they changed it in Europa Universalis, but the regions generated by even the current Random New World are a little iffy, to say the least. And I don't see that generation looking particularly more realistic than something Civ 5 coughs up. They both look pretty lolsy to me. But that's okay, because the emphasis needs to be on gameplay. The other thing is, if you're talking about scale, just unit movement speed versus number of hexes on the board is the real question there. You can make your regions bigger or smaller, too, and it'll serve the same function.
Yep, and distance. And if you want to talk regions, then you can also look at Endless Legend, which implemented a regional system. Most of their generation of regions is goofy. Like, you get this super little long thing that winds around another region and blocks off a lot of stuff. But even though you settled way down here, apparently, since that long tail of the region goes far away, you can block people from, crossing it far, far away from you. So there's that. It's not to say that somebody couldn't come up with an actual good region building set of code scripts, because obviously the two that we're looking at, EU and Endless Legend, both don't do it well enough. So there could be a better one. But also, pathing. Pathing would be the same problem.
Yeah, I don't see how changing the borders would alter the AI pathfinding significantly.
All it would do is make the distance to go smaller, but it would still be a pathfinding thing. Like, I need to get from this region to that region. Now you have to pathfind around stuff and through stuff and yada, yada, yada.
The only thing you could really do that would change things a lot, and I don't think the machine resources can handle it, is to just completely remove any region, tile, hex, anything, and just have entities on the map. But there'd just be so friggin' many.
Well, there's
so many
games that have tried that.
Well, StarCraft does it, but the scale is so much smaller. The only things you're interacting with are other units, buildings, and minerals, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, but it's still tiled. So when you
maybe, but it's in practice, you're not observing that.
No, when you go to put down a barracks, when you go to build it, it has an exact pattern. Those are how many wide, how many tall, and it has to go on the map. You can't just go, well, there's a cliffside there, so it'll be a pretty barracks because we put it on the cliffside, and you can rotate it. No, you can't rotate it. It has to go in an exact manner.
Okay, fine, but the units are not moving.
89 degrees.
The units are not moving based on these tiles at all.
No,
they are.
No,
there.
Those aren't, obviously.
And that's what he's talking about when it comes to the movement type stuff here. So you could go that route, but I don't know that it would necessarily make the game better, and I doubt the AI would improve much. I've never seen a turn-based game attempt to follow the StarCraft model of unit. You'd have to give them ranges per turn or something, and just limit that. It's hard to picture right.
But even thinking Endless Legend, it has regions, but it still uses hexes for unit movement.
Yeah.
And, well, you have usual pathing problems. And I guess if you go to a region-based, and maybe he's just trying to think totally abstract, where you have a region and not actual stuff in it. So no mountains, no rivers, no river crossing penalties, no weird stuff like that. And then you don't need to worry about the micro-pathing. You just say, oh, they're in there somewhere. But it doesn't mean that you're going to get more natural-looking maps, though. You could have a more natural-looking map of Civ 5, in Civ 5, just by looking at some of the mods, because I'm pretty sure that we looked at a couple of mods like that a long time ago in Modcast.
You could also just have it generate a natural-looking map and then lay the hexes on top of it and then just have some awkward places where units would stand. But you still abstract that as a land region or a sea region or eligible or not eligible for movement. You could do that.
Yeah.
I think the real big key to take away from this is just the unit movement scaling versus the scale of other things in the game. And I do agree that Civ 5 is a little off there.
Thinking of other ways of doing it, if you look at the Stardock way, where they went with Fallen Enchantress, instead of regions or hexes, they put spots on the map where there was ability to settle, which was sort of like regions because they shifted them out, but it basically, at that point, you lose the functional control of going, well, I want my city here. I can't. There's only specific spots on the map to be able to put a city. And then you could be silly and just throw up an outpost around it and protect it from somebody else putting a city there. And then all of a sudden your border is 5,000 kilometers away because no one could put cities in the middle.
Yeah.
Neokao Kodum said what had already come up in part, which was cities in Civ 5 look like regions anyway. And he says, your question is more about should we modify the way armies move? And Supremacy King acknowledges in reply, yes, you are right. The army movement is the crux of what I'm getting at. And for pathing, etc. as well, Neo is like, keeping the tile system or not, say slightly different roles than other civs. Considering army moves, I think it would be cool if we had armies instead of units. Well, we could still have units, but generals would unite them into armies. And immediately I'm thinking, yeah, we had that in Civilization Revolution where that was specific. And I know some people might say, oh, aren't armies kind of abstracted in the artwork? Anyway, because when a unit gets damaged, then there might have been, like 3 warriors, for example, but now there are only 2, so therefore it already was an army. No, an actual purposeful in-game mechanic armies. I'm not saying to just copy what Civilization Revolution had, but I would like to see something like Civilization Revolution had for that, which would also help with pathing, not only for the human player, but also for the AI.
Yeah, I mean, there's other random things in here, like Cricket 2 throws in the idea of armies don't actually leave places. They just have a range, like aircraft. So an army could have a range of certain space and they can go invade another place if it was close enough. Or that scout is super long range, so it can go running around the map without actually, quote unquote, running around the map and getting confused about what's going on. Because the scouts, if you leave them on automate, it does that anyways.
Some sort of attrition for the scout.
Yeah, scout slowly dies because somebody forgot to feed them.
Your scout has died in miasma. Oh, wait, no, that's another game.
Mistakes were made.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind the concept of a range for armies, but not that way. Like, armies should be on the map because if things have range, and they're like, I want to go settle that place over there, does that place have to have a range? Like, how close is it? And then I can maybe send a settler over there, except I'm not really sending a settler, I'm just clicking a button. And then the level of abstraction for the game becomes so high that you literally have nothing on the map except for cities.
No, and I was thinking range, I was very explicitly thinking, like, you still have a physical unit on the board. It would be tough to run a Civ game and still have it be Civ if you don't have any armies on the board.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, like, that might be a little too far. But the idea that there is a board, and you can only go out so far, like most space games. Most space turn-based games, or even some of the RTS versions, you have a logistical, this is how far you can go in before you can have to turn back or whatever, because this is only how far we can bring food to you, and stuff like that. And that could get bigger over time. But then that sort of concept in Civ would probably be okay, because then you would limit things like you can't just mass a bunch of settlers and whip them across the planet, picking off islands when you just started, or deciding to mass profit the other continent because that was fun. Like, people die on the way. That sort of concept where there's a functional limit to how far you can get away also means that you can't really douse somebody across the map until you can actually reach them, which would be a bit more historical. China didn't randomly declare war on the Ottomans for giggles.
Yeah, being able to reach your target was kind of an important part of the equation, yes.
And for no other reason than to help the AI with such things.
Hey, dummy, stop it.
So, 2 things. First off, you do not want the abstraction to be so great that you are bored. Bored with the game. But Europa Universalis is not the only other title Supremacy King 2 mentions in the thread. Nope, later on. Another possibility is that you could have both regions and hexes like Endless Legend does it. Units would still move from hex to hex, but the map would designate a group of hexes as a region. When you settle a city inside a region, the entire region would become yours. The borders would shift to include the whole region. This would really help solve the border problem that Civ 5 has. Regions would also be used to determine what special resources the city has access to. Regions would serve as a nice way of showing a city's sphere of influence.
Yeah, I don't mind the regional way of doing it inside Endless Legend, because I've actually been playing that more lately. But they also have a crap ton of other mechanics related to that, very specifically related to how that interacts with other things that Civ doesn't have, or has completely different because they don't have regions. And even still, I don't exactly like how Endless Legend does regions either. There's some goofiness related to it. So, yeah, I'm not really sure about regions per se. And if you have regions, where's your city-states? Does a city-state take up an entire region?
Sounds like it would.
Yeah, that's the problem. How many city-states, I mean, if you think way back in Babylonian history time, there was a lot of city-states all really close to each other. That couldn't happen if you have regions. And then what about barbs? How would you have barbs?
Screw barbs.
Yeah. Oh, those barbarians! They've never done anything for history.
Well, disambiguating them from, like, nations is a little questionable in many cases.
Civ's version of barbs is more like the old school tribal stuff back in the Roman era. But anyways, the concept of Civ has always been to try and find that middle ground between total abstraction and totally too detailed. And if it's not trying to hug the middle ground, then yeah, it's not Civ. Because what you're really saying is that, can you make a completely different game but still call it Civ? And I think the generalized answer has to be no, because there are other games out there.
You can
Endless
call
Legend,
it won't be.
yeah, but Endless Legend has regions and units and stuff. They don't call it Civ. It's Endless Legend. And even if they went fully historical with it, it still wouldn't be Civ. Because in history, there was no such things as, oh, I settled in the top part of Iberia. Now I own it all. It's all mine. Ha ha. No, that never happened. So if that never happened in history, why should it happen in a history-flavored game?
Honorable mention from episode 266.
All of you shut up.
Wait, all of us shut up. I think Mackie has just done the closing.
No, that was the Facebook feed.
Shut it up.
But...
Shut it up, you.
And number 1 from episode 253.
Whoa.
I don't know, maybe Renaissance, because you start getting some of the fun stuff.
Now, Mackie.
What?
You know why you said Renaissance. That's why you chose it. Come on, you can be honest with us. It's just you and I.
No, it's you and I and a bunch of other people and a bunch of people listening on the internet. And no, that is not why I picked it. Yeah, I've gotten to the point where I want to mute you guys every time somebody says that.
Even I do, and that's saying something.
Yeah, see? Even Phil is just like, no, stop.
You know what the solution is?
Of course, we're just encouraging them to do it more, but that's besides the point.
The solution is build the Great Wall.
Yes.
Oh, Brandon.
Call in today.
In North America, 301-637-7659.
In Europe, 44121-288-7659.
The only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about.
Log on to the series' official website at
PolyCast.net.
Thank you for tuning into PolyCast Evergreen Season 10. I'm Daniel DanQ Quick.
I'm CanusAlbinus. Lower your defenses.
And surrender your turns.
Civilization 1 clips, copyright Microprose.
Civilization 4 sound clips, copyright Take-Two Interactive. Copyright Civilized Communication at civcom.net.